Good morning, it's 7 o'clock on today's programme. Wrongfully convicted post office sub-postmasters finally learn their route to compensation.
The Chief Inspector of Prisons joins us this hour to issue a stark warning on the danger drones now pose to Britain's jails.
Plus, is a state visit by the French President Keir Starmer's chance to halt small boat crossings in the Channel.
It's Tuesday, the 8th of July. Your headlines. The first volume of the report into the post office scandal will outline the compensation process today and lay bare the impact on victims.
Guilty. You can't unhear those words, and the look on my mum's face, my dad, will stay with me forever.
King Charles will welcome the French president to Windsor Castle for the start of a 3-day state visit. Benjamin Netanyahu nominates President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize as the ceasefire with Iran continues to hold.
It is a big day at Wimbledon, where the last Brit standing, Cameron Norrie, takes on the champion, Carlos Alcaraz. Plus, injury robs Grigor Dimitrov of victory against the world #1 Yannick Sinner.
A very good morning to you. The first results of the long-awaited post office inquiry are published today. Volume 1 focuses on the impact the scandal had on victims and the compensation process. That financial redress is likely the most important issue for the hundreds of sub-postmasters wrongfully convicted of stealing because of the faulty Horizon software. Many are still waiting on payouts. Adele Robinson met the family of one of them.
I feel like I just was so... I feel so...
It stole.
It stole such a lot of me.
Yeah.
This is the Post Office Horizon scandal, still being felt.
I was so... I find it really hard to say, but I was so vulnerable. But I didn't fully understand.
No.
Sisters Kate and Rebecca are indirect victims.
I have had, very dark thoughts of suicide.
Their mum, Elaine, was convicted of stealing from her post office branch in 2003.
These are my favourites.
A post office that used to be here inside their family shop.
There you go.
Oh, Julia.
Thank you.
Look at that for service.
Brilliant.
I'm so proud of my mum.
Yeah, we are so proud of her. She's just to not run away and to be so strong and to remain here. The fact that she carried on, she stood here. She faced all the people that, let's face it, would have been talking behind her back.
Yeah.
And
that we had thief, your mum's a thief, shouted through the door.
The effect on the sisters and so many other children of post office victims is profound.
I'd gone from sort of limiting what I ate to then physically making myself sick. My only control of that situation was what food I put in my body.
Rebecca was 17 when her mum was accused, Kate just 14.
I've been in and out of therapy for what feels like most of my adult life, and it absolutely categorically goes back to this.
The human impact on all victims is a key focus for the first public inquiry report into the scandal. Kate, who set up the charity Lost Chances for the children of those affected, hopes it's recognised.
It's important that our voices are heard, not only within the report, but in law, actually. And then maybe that would be a deterrent for any future cover-ups. That it's not just the one person, it's the whole family.
Thousands of victims like Elaine now await the inquiry's conclusions.
I've always had this massive sense of injustice to want to fight for
all the other children.
and a public reckoning on one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in British history.
Guilty. You can't unhear those words, and the look on my mum's face, my dad, will stay with me forever.
Adele Robinson, Sky News.
Well, let's speak now to Sky's Alice Porter, who's there for us, where we're expecting, of course, further details later today. Alice, what is the vibe? I mean, I guess we can see some minor protests gathering behind you, or not?
Not for the moment, but we can certainly expect many of the sub-postmasters and mistresses will be coming along later this morning, eagerly awaiting the report which will come out at about midday today. And it's important to stress just how long this wait has been for victims. It was 25 years ago that a sub-postmaster was first wrongly convicted under this scandal. So this has been a very much a long wait for the truth to be laid bare in the inquiry's first volume. Now, in terms of what is going to happen later today, it's not going to be who knew what and when in terms of post office and Fujitsu. That's going to be coming either later in the year or next year. Today is going to be focusing on the human impact of this scandal and on the issue of compensation. And the reason it's been done in this way by the chair of the inquiry, Sir Win Williams, is because the issue of compensation is just so pertinent to victims. Hundreds of victims have died already without receiving any compensation. And to just give you the scale of just how many people have been impacted by the scandal, we know the latest government figures suggest that over £1 billion has already been paid out to more than 7,000 claimants. And we will, as you were hearing from Adele's piece there, this is something that doesn't just impact individuals who were impacted, but also their children as well. And the compensation issue is something that's going to be really pertinent today. There's been huge criticism of the various compensation schemes. There's 4 different compensation schemes, and many even high-profile victims, such as Sir Alan Bates, are still continuing to fight for the sum of money they believe that they are owed, because it's important to stress of just the financial losses that so many victims have had. Many of them have lost their jobs, their homes, their livelihood, and that's had huge impact on their families. So today we're hoping at midday this will be very much laid bare publicly for the first time.
That's great stuff. Thanks so much. We look forward to that. We're going to be talking to 2 former sub-postmasters and mistresses coming up at 8:30 as well. As you can see, Mari's here because we're going to talk about all the day's politics in just a moment, part of which might stem from what the Prime Minister is doing today, because he is going to meet with the French President Emmanuel Macron, who will be welcomed by the King and Queen for a 3-day state visit today. Macron will address Parliament this afternoon, followed by a state banquet in Windsor. Behind the pomp and ceremony, though, is an opportunity for Sir Keir Starmer to question his French counterpart on small boat crossings. Let's first hear Rhiannon Mills' report ahead of this 3-day state visit.
In Windsor, there is nothing low-key about the welcome that President Macron and his wife are set to receive, in what will also be an important reunion between old friends. The King and Macron have certainly always seemed close, and it's a bond that's again being used to bring our countries even closer together.
This is the first time in over 10 years that Windsor has hosted a state visit, making it extra special for the Macrons. Their big day starting with a carriage procession along the high street with their royal hosts as they make their way to Windsor Castle. But it's back here in London and those political meetings that go on behind the scenes, the ones that we don't get to see, that really underpin the significance of a visit like this.
Something that the King will allude to in his speech at the state banquet, saying our 2 countries face a multitude of complex threats emanating from multiple directions. As friends and as allies, we face them together. These challenges know no borders, no fortress can protect us against them this time.
Hobnobbing with the King, even for him, is still a bit special.
Lord Ricketts, who was the UK's ambassador to France until 2016, says it's not the King's role to get bogged down in issues like the migrant crisis.
His job is to set the scene, to remind everyone that Britain and France are old nations, they have an enormous amount to share, the history is there, and depth of personal relationships, And then that's the backdrop for Keir Starmer to get into the questions where maybe there are still differences.
Away from the castle, there will be more difficult discussions on current topics, as the royals again provide reminders of a shared history, and that can be very powerful, especially when delivered with the personal touch. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News, at Windsor Castle.
Said Mari's here. I'm quite looking forward to his address in Parliament. I mean, A, it's rare that a foreign head of state does that sort of thing, but also, as much as he's got domestic political problems, he's got a lot of charisma. He obviously his English is fluent. I'm quite looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think.
What's that? That's at 4 o'clock.
Ish, yeah, ish.
So we look forward to that, and then talk us through what's the headline policy that might come out of this that's being talked about. Sort of one in, one out.
Yeah. So this is a policy that we don't know if it's been finalised. We don't know whether, there's reporting that it's on the cards, but it's still to be finalised, and there's still lots of difficulties with it and complications. And trying to speak to Number 10, haven't got much out of them yet on this. But essentially, if it were to happen, there could be this policy where there'd be a one-in, one-out system where we would essentially we would send back channel migrants, so those who crossed the channel in small boats, back to France in exchange for a different person. So it'd be a legitimate asylum seeker with a legitimate claim, a family member already in the UK, those kinds of things. And if it were to happen, on one hand, on the face of it, you would argue, well, this isn't going to affect the numbers, it's one in, one out, so how's that going to make any difference to the numbers? But I have a feeling the government would argue that it would have a deterrent effect. If people felt that they would essentially just be sent back anyway, then perhaps it might deter people from bothering to make that journey in the same way. And there's interesting reporting this morning in some of the papers that actually the Rwanda plan, which was seen as a deterrent, was one of the kind of almost obstacles between the UK and the France's relationships, and that kind of abolition of the Rwanda plan had to essentially go in order to actually get the French on the table to discuss these kinds of deals. So I think if it does come off, it could be seen as a massive success for the government if it then has the knock-on effect that they'll be hoping for. The difficulty is it will be a difficult sell to the public when you've had record numbers of people crossing the channel, 44,000 people across the channel since Keir Starmer's come to power. That's the highest on record. And therefore, there's been a year or over a year now of trying and failing to get people to stop crossing the channel. So it could be a really successful policy if they manage to get it over the line and if it actually works.
Yeah, it's going to, I guess, suggest that even some of these numbers you want, even if it's then legal rather than illegal, you want to remain long-term. And you know at least one party, if not more, will say we want the number to be 0.
Exactly.
And so it might be a hard sell, as you say. Macron, I'm told, is 4 p.m. onwards in Parliament, so we look forward to that. Just quickly, wealth tax. So what I'm interested on this is, throughout the course of yesterday, it wasn't shut down. I know we're not going to get the full budget ahead of the budget, but it just means now it's going to breed itself as a potential thing that the left of the Labour Party, perhaps the left or even centre of the political spectrum across the UK, might quite welcome. And with all the sort of U-turns and sort of being held to ransom by members of the party that the government's faced in the last couple of weeks, they might regret not shutting it down.
It's so fascinating. The amount of chatter about a wealth tax at the moment in politics.
By the way, which all stemmed from Trevor Phillips's interview with Lord Kinnock on Sunday.
Exactly. So you heard it here first. But what is so fascinating, as you say, is the fact that the government haven't automatically shut it down. So in April, Rachel Reeves was speaking to The Telegraph. She was asked about a wealth tax and she categorically shut it down. She said, no, we're not having it. Yesterday at the lobby briefing in Downing Street, they were asked about that and they said, oh, you've seen the Chancellor's words on that. The Chancellor's ruled it out. But when you speak to government ministers on the airwaves, they're not shutting it down. And this feels like, as you say, they are leaving that door, let's say, ajar. And the more you allow that speculation to grow and you don't shut it down, the harder it is to shut it down if you then change your mind and decide not to do it, especially if it's considered to be a very popular policy among people who feel that actually, hold on a second, why should working people's taxes go up when those people over there have got way more cash than me? And if you don't allow if you don't starve it of oxygen, you feed that narrative, and it's so difficult to put that genie back in the box.
Yeah, and it probably won't be an unpopular policy to be considered. We'll talk to the government at 7:15 about that. We'll talk to Paul Johnson of the IFS at 9:20 about whether it will work or not, regardless of how popular it is. And we'll also talk to somebody who might have to pay it if it was introduced. Lord Brown, the former BP CEO, joins us at about 8:40 this morning. So lots to come on all of that. Mari, for now, thank you so much. Leah's got all of the day's other top stories for us.
Yeah, we're talking Liberation Day taxes again. Donald Trump has announced tariffs on at least 7 countries to come into effect next month, among those targeted Japan and South Korea. It marks the restart of the so-called Liberation Day taxes, which were paused for negotiations to take place with all US trading partners. The government plans to ban non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, designed to silence employees who've suffered harassment or discrimination. So Labour wants to amend a section of the Employment Rights Bill to void the legal contracts. Israel's Prime Minister has nominated US President Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. Benjamin Netanyahu handed over the nomination letter for the US President to read during a dinner at the White House. This was just last night. It comes after Mr. Trump took credit for stopping the conflict between Iran and Israel last month. Meanwhile, negotiations continue with Hamas in Qatar for a US-brokered ceasefire in Gaza. During that meeting, Netanyahu declared that the US and Israel were working with other countries who want to give Palestinians a better future.
We'll work out a peace with our Palestinian neighbors, those who don't want to destroy us, and we'll work out a peace in which our security, the sovereign power of security, always remains in our hands. Now, people will say it's not a complete state, it's not a state, it's not that. We don't care. You know, we vowed never again. Never again is now.
And a hero sniffer dog has been killed in Italy after eating sausages filled with nails. So Bruno's trainer claims the food was deliberately thrown into his kennel. Bruno was trained to help track down missing people. Italy's Prime Minister called it a vile, cowardly, unacceptable act. Authorities in Texas say more than 100 people have died during flash floods over the weekend. At least 40 people are still missing, including 10 girls who were at a summer camp. Martha Cowner reports.
They sing hymns in a bid to stay calm amid the panic of evacuation. Girls who had been at a Christian summer camp, like thousands of children from across Texas, spending their holidays in this part of the state. Brought here by the rugged natural beauty. Over the weekend, it conspired against them. This river rising catastrophically.
Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God.
The enormity of what they survived at dawning at daybreak. 27 of their fellow campers died here, making this one of the worst mass casualty events for children in America's history.
That's every parent's nightmare. Every mom and dad. Last week, we were picking up our daughter from camp here in Hunt. Our girls have gone to camp here for a decade.
The destruction of the cabins tells its own tale, with mud up to the windows. As the water sloshed in, the camp director ordering girls onto the top bunks. But 2 cabins in particular, home to the youngest campers, were trapped in a whirlpool. These are some of the 8 and 9-year-olds who slept in the cabin known as Bubble Inn. 10 in total have been confirmed dead. 3 remain missing, alongside a 19-year-old camp counsellor. Another 19-year-old camp worker, Chloe Childress, also died. Further up the river, a boys' summer camp was also engulfed. 7-year-old Brock struggling for words to articulate his ordeal.
We jumped up to another bed, like a top bunk, and like our bed starting tipping over, and like we got to the top really quick, and then we like this, and then like one of the walls like fall down.
The flooding risk here is well known. The lack of a warning system often debated. Local authorities saying it was too expensive to install sirens. Instead, text alerts in the middle of the night were the only option. The Trump administration's cut to the National Weather Service is also being scrutinised.
Many Democrat elected officials are trying to turn this into a political game, and it is not. This is a national tragedy, and the administration is treating it as such. We know the National Weather Service provided early and consistent warnings. They gave out timely flash flood alerts.
They slash through debris as rescue operations continue. The chance of finding more survivors here is dwindling, though. Attention now turning to the lessons which might be learned from this tragedy. Martha Kellner, Sky News.
We're going to speak to the government now. Delighted to say I'm joined by the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander. Very good morning to you, Minister.
Good morning.
Great
Thanks
to
for
see
having
you.
me on.
So quite a slew of announcements today. Just give us the headline of what you're talking about.
So we're announcing over 50 road and rail upgrades across the country, and this is on the back of the £92 billion worth of investment that the Chancellor committed to transport schemes in the spending review. And so this includes a new link road, for example, between the M54 and M6 in Staffordshire, the Transpennine dualling of the A66 between Carlisle and Scotch Corner, junction improvements in places like Derby around the A38, but also a number of big rail schemes. We're building new stations at places like Wellington and Cullompton in Devon, a new station at Haxby in Yorkshire. And this is going to create tens of thousands of jobs. It's also going to support the delivery of new homes. We've got a commitment as a government to crack on and get building 1.5 million homes this Parliament, but the infrastructure has to be there. We can't have roads that are snarled up. We need people to have good public transport options. And so this is all about delivering this government's plan for change and getting the economy firing on all cylinders.
So if we focus, for example, just on those top 3 road projects you mentioned, how long do they take? When will they actually be delivered?
So those 3 schemes are very significant schemes, and they will take a number of years to be constructed. But it's important that in this spending review, we have put the money in place to get on with delivering them. We've got to develop something called the Roads Investment Strategy, which we need to publish by March of next year. That will cover a 5-year period, and so the construction will take place over that period of time.
So they'll be finished in 5 years?
So most of the schemes will start construction within the next 5 years. They all have varying lengths of time that they will take to complete.
Do we have an estimate for when those 3 will be finished?
No, we will be publishing that when we publish the Road Investment Strategy in March.
So I guess, just to conclude, that these are sort of decade-long projects.
I don't believe that they will take a decade to deliver, no. I think they will be delivered more swiftly than that, but it is true to say that these are very significant schemes which will take a number of years to deliver, probably not stretching out as far as 10 years, though. And we've chosen these schemes because we know that we can get them on site and that we can, get those jobs created in the supply chain, which is really important, but it's also going to unlock the construction sites as well for new housing, new commercial development. It's not just those three schemes I mentioned. We're also giving the green light from a funding perspective to the Simster Island improvements in Greater Manchester, which is really important for the Mayor's Development Corporation there, the M60, the M62, that set of roads in Greater Manchester. That does need to go through the planning process, and also the A46 scheme around Newark, again, which needs to go through the planning process. But we're getting ahead of the curve and setting aside the money. If those schemes are consented, the money that is there to get on and do the work. I
wanted to touch on taxes. It's widely accepted now that taxes will have to go up in some form in the autumn statement. Would a wealth tax be a less unpopular way of doing that than some other options?
So we've always been clear as a government that those with the broadest shoulders should carry the greatest burden. And if you look at some of the decisions that we have taken in the last year, be it the changes to capital gains tax, the changes to the non-dom rules, because we believe that even if you're born elsewhere but you live in the UK, you should be paying your fair share of tax. We obviously applied higher taxes to private jets, and we said to the 5% of parents who send their children to private school, that actually they can't get the tax breaks on private school fees, the VAT tax breaks that they previously did, so that we could invest that money in public services. And that was really the priority for the Labour government after the election, was to make sure that we had money there to invest in hospitals, in schools, and we've seen some of the success of that. There's so much more to do. We promised 2 million extra hospital appointments. We delivered 4 million extra. We've got those breakfast clubs that are being rolled out in schools at the moment. And so, look, matters about taxation are for the Chancellor, and she will take those decisions in the round when we get to the autumn budget. But I think fairness is really our guiding principle as a government.
And I guess, in principle, though I totally accept that you're not trying to predict or tell us what the Chancellor might do, but a wealth tax would be one of the less unfair routes that you could pursue.
I think the most important thing for the government to do in the next couple of months is maintain its focus on growing the economy, because if we can increase the tax receipts that government gets in from businesses because they're expanding, because they're doing well, then that will reduce the need for any other type of tax increases, and it will increase the overall amount of money that is available to spend on public services. And that's why the announcement that I'm making today about investment in transport infrastructure is really key if we're going to get the economy growing, if we're going to unlock the productivity gains that we need to see in some of our great cities outside of London and the South East. The sort of rail schemes that I'm talking about today, places like Birmingham with the Midlands Rail Hub to dramatically increase the number of connections that can be made into Moore Street in Birmingham. You know, that's really important stuff, as well as all of the work we're doing with HS2 between London and Birmingham, East-West Rail, the Transpennine route upgrade. And so, you know, that's the number one mission of this government, to get our economy firing on all cylinders. We've actually secured £120 billion of international inward investment into the UK since coming into government. And so that's the key. If we can get the economy growing, then we've got the money there to invest in public services and really deliver on that change that people voted for and are impatient for when we had the election last year.
Remains to be seen, of course, if a wealth tax would aid that process or hurt it, even if it would be popular. But interesting to hear you not rule that out. Just on taxes, obviously, a year ago, the last autumn statement, you very much framed the need and reality of taxes going up as because of the economic inheritance. Fair to say that if taxes go up this autumn statement, it's because of your own actions in government?
Well, we don't know what the financial outlook will be in October.
That's fine. All decisions that come about in the autumn statement, is it fair to say now, are because of actions your government has taken?
No. I think that actually what has happened over the last 14 years of a Conservative government is untold damage has been done to our economy. And I think most reasonable people in the country recognise that it's going to take some time to fix the problems that exist everywhere. We have seen stagnant growth.
That's fine, but with all due respect, Minister, then the alternative has to be that you should have been more upfront with the population ahead of the last election. If you knew that tax raises were going to be necessary because of the inheritance, both last year and this year, you should have been more open with the electorate ahead of the election.
I think we were always straight with the electorate. We said that we wouldn't raise VAT, apart from making those changes for people that send their children to private school. We said we wouldn't put up income tax. We said that we wouldn't put up national insurance contributions for employees, for working people. Those were the words in our manifesto, and those are the conversations that I had on the doorstep, and we stand by that commitment.
Interesting, though, of course, the Chancellor did rule out a wealth tax, that's not being ruled out. But we shall see what happens. As you said, come the autumn statement, lots of decisions for the Chancellor to make. Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for your time. Thank you.
Let's have a look at the weather now.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. The weather sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Returning high pressure will make it mostly warm and dry later this week, with heatwave conditions likely in places by the weekend. It's mostly fine now, though cool in the north, but Norfolk has a few showers, while Ireland and the west of Northern Ireland are rather dull and damp. Mainland Britain will stay mainly dry and sunny all morning, but East Anglia can expect further showers. Ireland, Northern Ireland and the Hebrides, meanwhile, will see low cloud extending to most parts, bringing a light, patchy, drizzly rain. It'll be warmer generally. Western Scotland will cloud over later with patchy, light rain and drizzle moving in, while Ireland will brighten from the west.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, the Chief Inspector of Prisons will join us with a warning about a new danger for Britain's prisons.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up in just a moment, the Chief Inspector of Prisons is here, in fact, and we'll be discussing his latest report with a new danger he's identified in Britain's prisons. But first, a reminder of all of the day's top stories. Leah's got that.
Thanks, Wilfred. The results of the long-awaited Post Office inquiry looking into the impact on victims and compensation will be published later today. Many of the sub-postmasters wrongfully convicted of stealing are still waiting on payouts. The King and Queen will host French President Emmanuel Macron and his wife at Windsor Castle. It's all part of a 3-day state visit. Mr Macron will also address Parliament this afternoon before attending a signature state banquet. Israel's Prime Minister has nominated Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. Benjamin Netanyahu made the announcement during a dinner at the White House as he continues his visit to the United States. And more than 100 people have now been killed in flash flooding in Texas as search and rescue efforts continue, with at least 40 people still missing. The region is bracing for more heavy rainfall.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks so much. Now, the Chief Inspector of Prisons is calling on the government to take the flow of illegal drugs into prisons far more seriously. Let's speak to him now. Charlie Taylor is here. He is, of course, His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons. Very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. There's lots to get to in this new report that you've done, but I guess what a lot of people are focusing on is what's increased massively in your eyes as a problem is the scale of illicit drugs that are available in prisons?
Yeah, absolutely, and particularly the fact that drugs are being flown into prisons now with drones. So in the past, drugs could be thrown over the wall or they could be smuggled in. But what we're now seeing is very large packages can be delivered absolutely to people's cell windows, from where they can then be dispersed quickly around the prison, and sometimes of weights up to 10 kilos.
So snapshot how big a problem it is today compared to 5 years ago.
Well, certainly we didn't see anything like the level of ingress from drones 5 years ago. This is something that's increased over time and has got worse. And it's particularly bad in some prisons that have got vulnerable windows that can be breached easily by prisoners that have got grounds that are very big and very open, means that drone pilots can fly in packages, fly out again very quickly, often without even being detected.
And what are the sort of knock-on effects of this? Obviously, higher drug taking from prisoners. What does that lead to?
Well, when you have drugs in prison, what you get inevitably is debt. And when prisons get into debt, then some of those debts are sadly settled by violence. So what we see in those prisons that are getting high levels of drug ingress is we're seeing lots of violence as well. But also, we're seeing prisoners who are not motivated to get into the sorts of purposeful activity that the public would want them to be doing in order when they come out, they are able to get a job, get their heads down, get on with their lives.
Is it easy to address how to stop drones getting in? I mean, could you put a net up?
Well, yes, certainly. And we've seen in some prisons that nets have been effective in keeping drones off. And when we inspected Manchester, Long Lartin prisons, we found lots of netting had come down or wasn't effective. We found CCTV cameras around the prison that weren't working properly. And some of these basic security measures are essential if we're going to stop what is becoming a bigger threat to prisons across England and Wales.
Let's touch on some of the other parts of the report. Where are we on the overcrowding problem? Is that something that has eased at all but remains significant or not?
Well, yes, the absolute extreme pressure that we saw on the system last autumn, that has now been reduced. But nevertheless, we still have large amounts of prisons which are enormously overcrowded. And what that means is that prisoners, there isn't enough space for prisoners to go to the sorts of activities like learning, education, training that are going to help them to get jobs when they come out. So too often we're going to prisons where we're finding prisoners locked in their cells for up to 22 hours a day, really with nothing to do. And of course, the temptation then is to take drugs.
In terms of the sort of overall number of places in this country, I think we're at about 90,000 at the moment.
Just below, yes.
Do you think that's a sustainable level to be at, or should we have many more places coming online over the next decade in an ideal world?
Well, I think the numbers of prisoners coming in, the graph is only going one way. And the government, the prison service, the Ministry of Justice are going to need to build more prison spaces. We've had the David Gauke report coming out about sentencing reform, and that will begin to address some of these issues. But nevertheless, if you look at any of the projections over the next few years, the graph of prisoners coming in and the graph of the numbers of places available are very, very tight.
I mean, so we've just had the Transport Secretary on talking about various new roads, some new rail hubs. Do we need to see the government much with a more earnest sort of approach on this, announcing more prisons being built?
Well, yes, and there are some plans to build more prisons, but building a prison takes a hugely long period of time. There are planning processes, there are a very long and expensive building process, and then, of course, you've got to staff the prison as well. And what we're finding in lots of bits of the country is they can't recruit enough staff for the prisons they've already got. So building new prisons around those sites just puts more pressure on very stretched resources already.
Why is that? Is it a sort of rather miserable job to be a prison guard, or what? So the wages are too low?
Well, we come across lots of amazing prison officers who absolutely love their job and do an incredible job under very difficult circumstances. But it's not for everybody. It requires people with certain characteristics. You've got to be patient, you've got to be firm, you've got to be fair, you've got to be friendly, you've got to be able to manage some often difficult situations. Some people come in and they absolutely flourish, but some people realise very quickly it's not for them.
Final question on this, but notice this in one of your recent comments. You'd like to see prisons have more power, more authority, more devolved authority to the prisons themselves.
Well, it's amazing. I came from the world of education. I was a head teacher before I did this job. And I was amazed by how little power or autonomy prison governors have compared to me. So, for example, a prison governor can't even order a washing machine. They can't spend more than 500 quid without going through various permission processes and going through central procurement exercises. The kind of things that any other leader in any other sort of public service would be able to do very quickly. So those kind of frustrations get in the way of the many outstanding governors that we have being able to just get on with their job and flourish.
Really fascinating, as always. Charlie Taylor, thanks for stopping by. Good to see you, His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons. Right, switching focus now to Wimbledon. A big day ahead for everybody. There's some amazing matches coming. But Jackie, who I'm delighted to say joins us now, we've got to kick off with the last remaining, alas, Brit is playing today.
Yes, Cameron Norrie, the last Brit standing at Wimbledon this year, and he is up against the reigning champion, two-time champion, Carlos Alcaraz, and the world number 2. Norrie ranked 61 in the world, so on paper, an absolute mismatch. But this is tennis. Anything can happen, and Cam Norrie, who's had a very difficult year last year and saw his ranking, he fell from the world's top 10 basically. He just couldn't get the wins. He's really on the way back, and he's been very rejuvenated this Wimbledon. We've seen him a lot louder, more animated than before, because he's quite an introvert player, and he's just really enjoyed himself, and he has come through his matches with the steeliness that you just wouldn't doubt that he could replicate what he did in 2022, which was get to the semi-final. Add on to that, he's also beaten Alcaraz before, albeit in 2023. In the intervening couple of years, Alcaraz has won Wimbledon twice and the French Open twice, so you sort of have to add that into the mix. And he is unbeaten on grass here at Wimbledon in 18 matches, which is quite a record. But he has been playing golf with Andy Murray a little bit, and apparently he lost. He said, I let him win. So, I mean, maybe that's an omen. And he hasn't really been playing his absolute best. And when we saw him, you know, snatch victory from the jaws of defeat at the French Open just a few weeks ago in one of the greatest tennis matches ever against Yannick Sinner. So, you know, you also have to add that in, that the man is never beaten, which will just be very interesting to see what Cam Norrie can do on centre court. That's not his favourite court. He likes court 1, so he'll have to deal with centre today. And speaking of which, late last night, under the roof, there was huge drama on centre court. Yannick Sinner, the world number 1, one of the favourites for this title, fell and hurt his wrist. So he was struggling in the match physically, but he was also very much down on the scoreboard. He was 2 sets to love down against Grigor Dimitrov. It was 2-2 in the third, and then Grigor Dimitrov fell to the grass clutching his chest, which looked really worrying in that moment. He then said, it's my pectoral muscle, it's my pec. Went to the chair, had a little bit of treatment, walked off, but it was very clear he couldn't carry on. He couldn't lift his arm at all. And the guy was in tears. He was in total control of that match. Sinner very sportingly stood by him for the entire time, carried his bag off. And then, of course, he goes through by default, came back on to do the winner's interview and said, you know, I'm not counting that as a win. That was not a win for me. It was just an awful situation, and I hope my friend is all right. But it is Yannick Sinner that goes through. Unfortunate, but these things happen at Wimbledon from time to time.
Unfortunate, it certainly is. And Jackie, just remind us, what time's Norrie expected up?
So he's second on centre court, so it's a little bit how long's a piece of string. You've got Arina Sabalenka, the world number 1, against Laura Siegemund. You would have thought she would come through that fairly easily, but I mean, nothing has been like that this Wimbledon. The seeds have fallen all over the place, and Laura Siegemund is really enjoying herself here. Was never seeded or expected to get this far at all. So you just never know. But I would allow a couple of hours into the afternoon, early evening, I'm going to say.
Lovely stuff, Jackie. We'll be watching. Thank you very much. Jackie Beltran there for us at Wimbledon. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, the Lib Dems will join us. They're hitting out at the government's plans over special education needs spending. They're up next.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace. The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland. Catholics and Protestants now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19, religion's nothing.
Sky News, the full story first.
They are pushing forward, trying to get people to disperse.
What Prince Harry wanted to do was to eject me.
Is that your opinion?
It is. It is.
They were serious, coordinated attacks.
It's an entire generation that will have to contend with the horrifying impacts of this conflict.
The number of patients is increasing.
It's been quite some day.
Hey, what country are you from?
the UK.
Why don't you go back to your country?
You've gone viral.
I've ever had such a reaction.
It's just incredible.
Since the Oval Office meeting, have they reached out to you?
If Ukraine asks for help and its allies decide to help, then that's the end of it.
Criticism of you, the president, is banned. How is this a fair election?
Historic day here today. Beth Rigby from Sky.
You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more.
There could be some more painful decisions to come.
Thank you. Thank you all.
I'm Cordelia Lynch, Sky's Asia correspondent based here in Bangkok.
The only way they'll allow elections is if I'm inside jail or killed.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Free, wherever you get your news.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent. Sky News, the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Delighted to say we're joined by the Liberal Democrats now, and the education spokesperson, Munira Wilson, in particular. Very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. So let's start with your department and the Educational Health and Care Plans, EHCPs. It's been in focus over the last couple of days. I guess let's start, and these give a legal right to ensure that children with special needs and special educational needs get the funding that they require. Starting point on this, does it need to be reformed in some way?
Yes, absolutely. And I think Liberal Democrats have been saying for a long time that, sadly, the previous Conservative government left the special needs system in a broken state. You speak to any parents and carers of children with special needs across the country, and sadly, they have to fight tooth and nail to get the support their children absolutely deserve and need. So yes, we do need to reform the system, but that can't start with rolling back the rights of children and families. It needs to start with fixing many of the problems to make sure that children get the support they need so families aren't having to fight every step of the way.
But obviously, so we don't know all the government's plans on this yet, but if the framing of this is currently it doesn't work, and I think the wording yesterday was currently it's lose, 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 you agree with that?
Well, yeah, it was actually a Conservative Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, repeated by Keir Starmer, I think, saying it is lose, lose, lose. So, yes, it does need to be reformed. But we've seen just in recent times with the government's welfare changes that actually it was driven by cost-cutting as opposed to making sure that children get the support they need. And that is the fear out there, that this is being driven by the Treasury, by cost-cutting, and not about how we can meet children's needs better in a less adversarial way so parents aren't fighting all the way.
So interested to hear on your details on that. But before we get to it, I mean, special needs educational spending has gone up from £8 billion to £12 billion in a year.
Yeah.
I mean, Is that sustainable?
Well, it is true that the budget has spiralled, and one of the root causes of that is the fact that we've got not enough specialist provision that's provided by the state through local authorities for those children with high needs who can't learn and thrive easily in a mainstream school. The result of that is local authorities up and down the country are spending 3, sometimes 4 times the amount they would spend on a state special school on private special schools, often run by private equity companies. And just earlier this year, Liberal Democrats pressed the Labour government to a vote to profit cap those private equity company-run special schools, and they voted against it. That immediately would release funding into the system that is being denied from children who need support. That's just one example of where things could change, and it could be done overnight. The government's got the chance at the moment.
So I guess where I'm coming to on this, I mean, it sounds like if you think local councils are spending on some situations 3 or 4 times more than they should be, that the actual headline amount that's spent on this area can come down.
Absolutely. So if we crack down on the profiteering in private special schools, that would also mean if we had more local authority-run special schools, that there are actually plans in the pipeline to build state-run special schools, but they've been very slow to come to fruition. And we know the previous Conservative government blocked local authorities' applications to build special schools. They would be closer to home, because the other area there's a huge amount of spending on is special educational needs transport to take children a long way from home to teach them in special schools. But also you can really save money by making sure that we train our early years practitioners and teachers to spot needs early, because actually if you intervene early, you stop problems spiralling, and actually children often, particularly with lower level needs, can be supported in mainstream classrooms without that specialist provision. So we've got to tackle the issue at both ends. Rolling back rights, which is what the Labour government is threatening to do from the reports we've heard, I think is a wrong way to go about it. It's like the welfare reforms. They're starting with cost-cutting rather than fixing the system.
Well, we haven't got their details on this yet, so it's sort of jumping ahead there a little bit. But I think more importantly, you know, to say it's starting with cost-cutting when you are acknowledging, and indeed you're, I think, outlining ways in which the costs can come down and the policy can be improved, suggests we need to wait for the details. And it's quite possible you will support this even if the headline amount that's spent in this area falls.
Well, what we're saying is unless you fix the system so that children get the support they need when they need it, you can't start to bring down costs. So there's a lot of things that we need to see change. The cost-cutting I talked about is hitting private equity companies in the pocket. I don't think many parents and carers out there would be concerned about that. But what they will be concerned about is if their legal rights are taken away. Because let me tell you, if you've had to fight for years, which many families I see have had to do, to be able to get your child the support they need and deserve, you would be terrified with that right being taken away. And that's why mine and many other MPs' inboxes are full of very concerned parents and carers.
Let's just quickly touch on a wealth tax. Is that a hypothetical thing that the Lib Dems could support?
Well, I think if you look at the evidence from around the world, 4 out of 38 of the largest economies only have a wealth tax. That's fewer than there used to be, because they haven't really been shown to work. The Liberal Democrats have set out a whole range of policies like reforming capital gains tax, reversing the tax cuts for bankers the Conservatives introduced, and actually taxing some of the world's wealthiest people through trebling the digital services tax, hitting the likes of Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk in the pocket. I think that's probably more the way to go in order to be able to raise the money to do some of these important things to support children and young people.
I know you've been critical in the past of the Conservatives. I was discussing this with Heidi Alexander earlier. Obviously, the inheritance was blamed for tax rises last year. If we have more tax rises this year, is that now on the current government more than the Conservatives?
Well, I think we've seen that the Conservatives have left a total mess and public services are in a state. I think fixing that mess is going to require investment. We know that people are crying out for their public services to be repaired, and that's why we've set out a whole range of areas where money could be raised, but also areas where money can be saved, and which I've just outlined, for example, on special needs.
Munira Olsen, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank
you. We're going to have a quick look at the weather now.
The perfect climate, wherever the destination. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Returning high pressure will make it mostly warm and dry later this week, with heatwave conditions likely in places by the weekend. It's mostly fine now, although cool in the north, but Norfolk has a few showers, while Ireland and the west of Northern Ireland are rather dull and damp. Mainland Britain will stay mainly dry and sunny all morning, but East Anglia can expect further showers. Northern Ireland and the Hebrides, meanwhile, will see low cloud extending to most parts. That's your weather.
The perfect climate, whatever the forecast. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Leah and Emma back as we wrap up the hour, and we've got a big sort of warning that's going to be coming to people's phones.
Yeah, September the 7th. It's a Sunday, around 3 p.m. This is what you're going to hear. So, 87 million phones are going to get this. Last 10 seconds, the phone will also vibrate, and there will be a message on your phone that says, "Don't panic, this is just a test." The first national test happened in April of 2023. Problem was, when they did it then, it didn't work for everyone. There were network issues. So I remember we were filming phones there and waiting for the moment. Nothing.
87 million phones,
Yeah.
you mentioned. So people have more than one phone on
Lots
average.
of people
I do,
don't they?
But,
yeah.
it's
Lots
amazing.
of people have a work phone as well. And actually, that's interesting because one of the reasons that they're publicising that this is coming up is that there are people who maybe have a second phone for a very serious reason, and that is because maybe they are suffering from domestic violence. They have it so that they can warn
hidden. Gosh, that's
and it's
interesting.
hidden. So part of the messaging today is to say, right, if that's the case, then what you need to do is go onto the government website, and there's actually a process you can go through that will enable you to opt out of your phone going off. So that is really, really important in those cases. And actually, since April 2023, when the first warning happened, it's been used 5 times.
That's really interesting extra detail that we had that. We're out of time. We're going to be back after this with all day's top stories.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock on today's programme. Wrongfully convicted post office sub-postmasters finally learn their route to compensation.
Yeah, and we'll speak to two former sub-postmistresses who were jailed ahead of the inquiry, releasing its first report later today.
Plus, pushed on a potential wealth tax this morning, the government still refuses to rule it out.
It's Tuesday, the 8th of July. Your headlines. The first volume of the report into the post office scandal will outline the compensation process today and lay bare the impact on victims.
Guilty. You can't unhear those words. And the look on my mum's face, my dad, will stay with me forever.
King Charles will welcome the French president to Windsor Castle for the start of a 3-day state visit. Benjamin Netanyahu nominates President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize as the ceasefire with Iran continues to hold.
It is a big day at Wimbledon as the last Briton standing, Cameron Norrie, goes up against the defending champion Carlos Alcaraz on centre court later. And injury robs Grigor Dimitrov of victory against the world #1 Jannik Sinner.
A very good morning to you. The first results of the long-awaited post office inquiry are published today. Volume 1 focuses on the impact the scandal had on victims and the compensation process. That financial redress is likely to be the most important issue for the hundreds of sub-postmasters wrongfully convicted of stealing because of the faulty Horizon software. Many are still waiting on those payouts. Let's speak now to Sky's Alice Porter. Alice, what time can we expect this to come out, and which of the details in this phase will be worth focusing on?
Well, the report will be released at midday today, and this has been the result of an inquiry that began 5 years ago. And as you were saying in your introduction there, today is going to be focusing on the human impact and the issue of compensation. There will be a second volume either later in the year or in the beginning of next year, and that's going to focus more on who knew what and when in regards to the post office and Fujitsu. So today, the focus really is about the issue of compensation and human impact. And the reason why Sir Win Williams has organised it in this way is because the issue of compensation is so pertinent to so many victims. There are hundreds of sub-postmasters who have already died having not received compensation. So it's a very real issue. And it's important to stress why it's so important for victims, let alone the symbolic importance of getting redress for the wrongdoing that was done to them. Many of the sub-postmasters and mistresses lost their homes, were bankrupt. It impacted them, impacted their children, and over 200 went to prison. So this is obviously something that's had huge impacts on thousands of people across the country. And to give you a sense of just how many people have been impacted, the government so far has paid out over £1 billion in compensation to more than 7,000 claimants. And although that figure may sound very large, it will be interesting to see what the key recommendations are from Sir Win Williams, because there's a huge complaints that have been made over the last few years of just how long it's taking to get that compensation into the pockets of the people who really need it. And there's been huge disagreement when it comes to the sums for people. If we take Sir Alan Bates, who's been, of course, the most high-profile campaigner, he still yet hasn't received a sum of money, and in fact says what he was offered in one of these schemes was half what he was claiming for. There's also criticisms of the fact that there are 4 different compensation schemes, and saying that this makes it bureaucratic, it's difficult for victims. So certainly I think the victims will be hoping that any criticisms of the 4 different schemes will be laid bare in the report today, as well as the important testimonies from so many of the victims. And we can expect that report at about midday today.
Alice, great stuff. As always, thanks so much for that. By the way, we're going to be talking to 2 former sub-postmistresses at 1:30 this hour, so stay tuned for that. Now, Mari's here, as you can see, to discuss all of the day's core political news. And Mari, the clip we've got from the Transport Secretary who joined us earlier, Heidi Alexander, and I asked her specifically whether or not she thought a wealth tax might be one of the less unpopular ways to raise taxes this autumn.
We've always been clear as a government that those with the broadest shoulders should carry the greatest burden. And if you look at some of the decisions that we have taken in the last year, be it the changes to capital gains tax, the changes to the non-dom rules, because we believe that even if you're born elsewhere but you live in the UK, you should be paying your fair share of tax. We obviously applied higher taxes to private jets, and we said to the 5% of parents who send their children to private school that actually they can't get the tax breaks on private school fees, the VAT tax breaks that they previously did, so that we could invest that money in public services.
I mean, she's not the Chancellor, obviously, but she certainly didn't rule it out, the idea of a wealth tax.
No, absolutely not. I thought that was really, really fascinating. So clearly it's on the table, but also kind of caveated by the fact that they say, essentially, we've already done wealth taxes. So to an extent, they are trying to remind people that the idea of a wealth tax is not something new and it's not something that they've never heard of and never even thought of before. What she's arguing is, hold on a second, we've already done that, but perhaps we need to go further. I found it interesting that she lumped in the VAT on private schools with the list of wealth taxes, because there are a lot of middle-class families who often make very difficult financial compromises in order to afford private school fees. So the idea that private school fees are only for the super rich, I think, is a bit of a murky area. But interestingly, she was talking about how fairness is our guiding principle, but also focusing on growing the economy. And depending on who you speak to, and it'll be interesting to see Paul Johnson when you speak to him later this morning on this, some people argue that those two things are not very compatible. So a wealth tax in comparison with trying to grow the economy. And some would argue it's doing the exact opposite, and therefore you can't grow that pie.
I think the additional point I just make on this is there was a lot of talk, only in the background, over the last month or two, that the government might have to reassess part of its non-dom change.
Yeah.
Not all of it, but part of it, because of the high number of wealthy foreigners that have been leaving. Yeah. What was also implicit in that answer is that is now off the table. If you're celebrating and pointing people towards what you've already done in a positive way, whether or not a wealth tax materialises or not, it doesn't sound like any of those other policies would be U-turned on.
No, it doesn't sound like it. The fact that they are, as you say, kind of waving and pointing and saying, look what we've done, these are fantastic. I think the other option that is often a political fudge that we'll see, and this is what Munira Wilson was talking about when you asked her from the Lib Dems, and she said, essentially, countries have tried, it doesn't work. But the other option that Labour does is they do something that is perhaps symbolic, that looks like a wealth tax, that is potentially, vote-winning, people-pleasing, that might not actually really raise any money, but that makes them look like they are trying. The difficulty will be finding a way of doing that doesn't put people off who are wealthy from leaving and thinking it might affect them.
Now, Mari's going to stick around because the other big item on the agenda today is President Macron arriving for a 3-day state visit. He's due to speak in Parliament this afternoon at 4 p.m. Before we discuss the political implications, here is our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills.
In Windsor, there is nothing low-key about the welcome that President Macron and his wife are set to receive, in what will also be an important reunion between old friends. The King and Macron have certainly always seemed close, and it's a bond that's again being used to bring our countries even closer together.
This is the first time in over 10 years that Windsor has hosted a state visit, making it extra special for the Macrons. Their big day starting with a carriage procession along the high street with their royal hosts as they make their way to Windsor Castle. But it's back here in London and those political meetings that go on behind the scenes, the ones that we don't get to see, that really underpin the significance of a visit like this.
Something that the King will allude to in his speech at the state banquet, saying our two countries face a multitude of complex threats emanating from multiple directions. As friends and as allies, we face them together. These challenges know no borders, no fortress can protect us against them this time.
Hobnobbing with the King, even for him, is still a bit special.
Lord Ricketts, who was the UK's ambassador to France until 2016, says it's not the King's role to get bogged down in issues like the migrant crisis.
His job is to set the scene, to remind everyone that Britain and France are old nations, they have an enormous amount to share, the history is there, and depth of personal relationships. And then that's the backdrop for Keir Starmer to get into the questions where maybe there are still differences.
Away from the castle, there will be more difficult discussions on current topics, as the royals again provide reminders of a shared history, and that can be very powerful, especially when delivered with the personal touch. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News, at Windsor Castle.
So, Mari, lots of pomp and ceremony and probably quite a enjoyable address to watch in Parliament at 4 p.m. But what about on the policy side? What's the focus, do you think, going to be for Starmer and Macron?
Well, so our team's been doing a bit of digging into what the French have been saying ahead of this visit, and it's quite interesting. So let me just read you some of the stuff that we're having from the French. So the French minister, government minister, he's actually the Minister for French people living in the UK. He's been talking about how they are keen to advance human mobility and cultural and academic cooperation, and then to address some of the more demanding, sometimes more difficult issues in our relationship, starting with the issue of migration. So clearly that's on the agenda. And then if you see the readout that we got from Number 10 overnight, they've said they're aiming to make ambitious progress, driving forward progress on tackling irregular migration, enhancing defence and security cooperation and boosting trade and investment. So there is clearly an alignment on what both sides are hoping to get out of this. And if we focus on migration for a second, there's a lot of speculation about whether we could potentially see the announcement of a one-in, one-out policy with the French. So that would mean we would essentially give a Channel migrant back to France, as it were, in exchange for a legitimate asylum seeker who had a genuine claim or family in the UK, and they would come over. People would argue that's not going to reduce the numbers, it's one in, one out, so essentially it makes no difference. But what the government will argue is, first of all, we are claiming people who genuinely have a reason to come, rather than people who we might end up getting bogged down in the backlog and then potential legal battles to try and get them removed. But also, they would argue that it would reduce the incentive of people crossing over in small boats at a time when we've had record levels, 44,000 people crossing the Channel since Keir Starmer came to power.
Mark, great stuff. President Macron at 4 p.m.
Yes.
You're going to be watching that, Leo, as well? I mean, what I love about this is he's got a lot of charisma.
Yes.
He is pretty good at his English is fluent. He's pretty good at speeches. But there's definitely some banter to be had between the Brits and the French, and I kind of back him to come and at least make a few jokes at our expense, at his expense.
Yeah, a bit of a bromance.
Yeah, a bit of a bromance.
Maybe.
But I think he can lean on the fact that there's always that competition and make it amusing, I think.
Yes, I mean, I think the thing about Macron is the most kind of famous moment in the past few months from Macron's moments is le slapgate. So I think if there's any banter going on there, the question will be, will any of those MPs cross the line and maybe mention that?
Well, that would be fairly bold.
I know.
One can hope. You brought it there. Let's hope he's not watching yet.
I tell you one person he has great bromance with, it's Donald Trump. He's back in the headlines. And this time for those tariffs. He's announced that 7 countries will be affected next month, we're hearing, and among those targeted, Japan and South Korea. It marks the restart of that so-called Liberation Day taxes, which were paused for negotiations to take place with all US trading partners. More on that to come, I'm sure. Elsewhere, the government plans to ban non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, and they're designed to silence employees who've suffered harassment or discrimination. And Labour wants to amend a section of the Employment Rights Bill to avoid the legal contracts. Israel's Prime Minister has nominated US President Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. Benjamin Netanyahu handed over the nomination letter for the US President to read during a dinner at the White House last night. It comes after Mr. Trump took credit for stopping the conflict between Iran and Israel last month. Meanwhile, negotiations continue with Hamas in Qatar for a US-brokered ceasefire in Gaza. During the meeting, Netanyahu declared that the US and Israel were working with other countries who want to give Palestinians a better future.
We'll work out a peace with our Palestinian neighbors, those who don't want to destroy us, and we'll work out a peace in which our security, the sovereign power of security, always remains in our hands. Now, people will say it's not a complete state, it's not a state, it's not that. We don't care. You know, we vow never again. Never again is now.
And a sniffer dog who helped find 9 missing people has been killed in Italy after eating sausages filled with nails. So Bruno, the bloodhound, died from internal bleeding after the food was deliberately thrown into his kennel. This is according to his trainer. Local media say Bruno helped track down lost children and people with Alzheimer's. Authorities in Texas say more than 100 people have died during the flash floods over the weekend. At least 40 people are still missing. That's including 10 girls who attended a summer camp. Martha Kellner reports.
They sing hymns in a bid to stay calm amid the panic of evacuation. Girls who had been at a Christian summer camp, like thousands of children from across Texas spending their holidays in this part of the state, brought here by the rugged natural beauty. Over the weekend, it conspired against them, this river rising catastrophically.
Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God.
The enormity of what they survived at dawning at daybreak. 27 of their fellow campers died here, making this one of the worst mass casualty events for children in America's history.
That's every parent's nightmare. Every mom and dad. Last week, we were picking up our daughter from camp here in Hunt. Our girls have gone to camp here for a decade.
The destruction of the cabins tells its own tale, with mud up to the windows. As the water sloshed in, the camp director ordering girls onto the top bunks. But 2 cabins in particular, home to the youngest campers, were trapped in a whirlpool. These are some of the 8 and 9-year-olds who slept in the cabin known as Bubble Inn. 10 in total have been confirmed dead. 3 remain missing alongside a 19-year-old camp counsellor. Another 19-year-old camp worker, Chloe Childress, also died. Further up the river, a boys' summer camp was also engulfed. 7-year-old Brock struggling for words to articulate his ordeal.
We jumped up to another bed, like a top bunk, and like our bed starting tipping over, and like we got to the top really quick, and then we like this, and then like one of the walls like fall down.
The flooding risk here is well known. The lack of a warning system often debated. Local authorities saying it was too expensive to install sirens. Instead, text alerts in the middle of the night were the only option. The Trump administration's cut to the National Weather Service is also being scrutinised.
Many Democrat elected officials are trying to turn this into a political game, and it is not. This is a national tragedy, and the administration is treating it as such. We know the National Weather Service provided early and consistent warnings. They gave out timely flash flood alerts.
They slash through debris as rescue operations continue. The chance of finding more survivors here is dwindling, though. Attention now turning to the lessons which might be learned from this tragedy. Martha Kellner, Sky News.
Time now to speak to the opposition. I'm joined now by Richard Fuller, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. A very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Can you understand why a wealth tax could be popular?
Well, yes, because people associate a wealth tax with people who make billions and don't think it will affect them. But actually, a wealth tax can affect your pension. It can affect if you own a home. So a wealth tax is popular because people think other people will pay it. And then when they start paying it, it will become unpopular.
Well, I guess all of that depends on the exact terms of it. But when we're in a tight spot, when some level of taxes might need to go up, the broad principle of those with the broader shoulders should carry the heaviest burden. Is that fair?
Well, it's fair if it's effective. Unfortunately, one of the issues about what the Chancellor's done is that people with the broader shoulders now are leaving the country. That's one of the impacts of her changes on the non-dom tax issue. And the other issue is that, as you said, we now know that because of the mistakes the Chancellor made last October, killing off growth in the economy, she's not getting the tax receipts, so she's going to be coming back for more taxes in the autumn. What she hasn't said yet is which taxes are going up. Is she going to tax working people? Is she going to extend the threshold freeze? Is she going to tax wealth in this country? We just don't know. It's another summer of uncertainty after last year's summer of uncertainty.
I mean, you wouldn't expect her to announce those taxes yet. Let's just dive through a couple of those things you said. So, firstly, on the non-doms, with hindsight, do you regret that that was a reversal of policy that your party, that Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak began?
Well, we've been looking, actually, the change on the non-dom status began all the way back with George Osborne. He was the one who started making changes to the non-dom status, and then there were further changes under Jeremy Hunt. I think the fundamental change that the Chancellor has done is that she has sent a signal that if you leave this country, we're going to have 10 years that we can come after you for inheritance tax. That is making people think very prematurely, perhaps maybe I should leave now because I don't know if I'm going to be alive in 10 years' time. So the Chancellor should be looking at that to see if she did make another mistake in her tax policy.
Do you regret the changes Jeremy Hunt made to it?
Well, I think in retrospect, we didn't have the same exodus. So, one of the people, I think it was the French tax minister many years ago, talked about taxation, getting the highest amount of tax without causing tremendous changes in behaviour. And I think where Jeremy had got perhaps hadn't yet breached the threshold. So I'm not prepared to say that I regret it, but I think it's one of the things that we should be looking at to see what will be put in place, given that what the Chancellor has now done has really, really broken the breach.
In terms of taxes overall, I mean, it is absolutely fair for the government to say that they inherited a tough situation with taxes. The overall tax burden was at a post-1951 high.
But then they increased it. I mean, if they thought it was a problem the tax burden was high, why did Rachel Reeves then purposefully go out and whack businesses with a massive tax increase at the same time as she was talking down the prospects for the British economy, which meant all those businesses, as they came into this new year, decided that they can't afford to hire people so much?
That might be right, but what you're acknowledging is something that you often push back on as a party, which is that the inheritance was incredibly tough, that you didn't leave the government with many levers to pull. If you're saying, yes, the tax burden was at a post-1951 high, but it can no longer be increased. It's like you take all of the benefits of, or the ability to spend money that you can raise taxes from, but then the next party has, oh, well, you can't raise it any further. We raised it an awful lot, but now you can't.
No, I think the election was I slightly disagree with you. So, first of all, the financial situation the country is in now is worse than it was a year ago, but it wasn't a tough situation. That is true. And we went into the election, the Conservative Party went into the election saying our approach to that is to bear down on public expenditure, bear down on welfare. The Labour Party came into office having said very little in the election about what they were going to do and decided they would dole out pay increases without any improvements in productivity, not do anything in terms of, particularly in terms of bearing down on welfare and now rolling back on those things. So we would have made different choices than the Labour Party has had. It is a difficult situation for the country, but that's no excuse for Rachel Reeves and this government to make it worse. And as we go into this summer, we now have another summer of uncertainty about how much more tax Rachel Reeves is going to have to raise off working people come the autumn.
David Jones defected yesterday. He has said in an interview with GB News that he initially wrote to the then party chairman in October.
That would be me.
Yeah, to say that he was planning to defect and that he didn't get a reply. Why didn't you reply?
So, look, first of all, I must apologise to David. I can't recall that particular communication. I had a number of former ministers get in touch with me over the summer as party chairman after the election on a number of things, as you can imagine. So I apologise to David he didn't get a reply. I've been searching through my messages for it. Doesn't mean he didn't send it, couldn't find it. And, of course, if that was critical for David moving, I doubt it was, but I should have replied and he should have had a response, and I apologise that he didn't get it.
Clearly, many months have passed since he finally announced the decision. Do you fear many more Conservative MPs are close to that decision, are thinking about it?
I think it's hard now for Conservative-minded people to go to reform because reform is changing. So reform, when it was on its ground of leaving the EU, being tough on migration, was a sort of natural for people who supported leaving the EU and wanted a tougher lines on migration. And a lot of those people would be natural small C Conservative, maybe large C Conservative voters. But Nigel Farage is changing reform. It's now moving into areas like we want to nationalise industries, that we want to provide benefits, more benefits to people. These are issues which are contrary to the natural instincts of Conservative people. So there is a split within the reform about which way it's going to go as it moves beyond its comfort zone. And I think for Conservative-minded people, they'll find ultimately that is not the home they want to be in.
Do you look forward to seeing President Macron in Parliament today?
I think he's coming. I don't think, is he coming today? I think he's coming tomorrow. I think he's with the King today. So, but yeah, of course I am. You're probably right, actually.
No, you're probably right. Well, we're going to clarify that in just a moment. But it is today, 4 p.m. today.
See, I can't reply to people's emails. I think, look, it is important to have them, yes.
And do you welcome that we're back on very good terms with the French?
Well, we should always be on good terms with other countries. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be looking after your own national interest. And if I was there with President Macron, I'd say, we hear what the things that you want from us, but we want to make sure we're getting good value for the money we're giving you to stop people crossing the channel, and hope that the Prime Minister is going to have that frank conversation with a friend.
Richard Fuller, great to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's have a look at the weather now.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Returning high pressure will make it mostly warm and dry later this week, with heatwave conditions likely in places by the weekend. It's mostly fine now, though cool in the north, but Norfolk has a few showers, while Ireland and the west of Northern Ireland are rather dull and damp. Mainland Britain will stay mainly dry and sunny all morning, but East Anglia can expect further showers. Ireland, Northern Ireland and the Hebrides, meanwhile, will see low cloud extending to most parts, bringing a little patchy, drizzly rain. It'll be warmer generally. Western Scotland will cloud over later, with patchy light rain and drizzle moving in, while Ireland will brighten from the west.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Criminal gangs are using drones to drop packages with up to 10 kilograms of drugs into prisons. That's just one of the findings in a new report from the Chief Prison Inspector that's out today. Molly Malone joins us with a bit more of the headline details on this, but the kind of new development that he's identifying in terms of the problems in the prisons is this drug use.
Yeah, and the drugs that are being taken in regularly via drones. We've heard about drones for a long time, but they're becoming more sophisticated and they're becoming much more regular. He described an overwhelming amount of drugs being taken into prisons and weapons too, all having this destabilising, according to the report, effect on life inside prison. He's most concerned about these Category A prisons, which the report says house some of the most serious criminals, including terrorists. He specifically mentions HMP Long Lartin and HMP Manchester, and he effectively said that the police and the prison service have ceded the airspace to what he described as organised crime gangs, allowing these drones to go into these prisons. In other prisons, he gave examples of drones carrying 10-kilogram packages, some of them being described as things like grass clippings or astroturf. So people being quite clever and sophisticated about what they're disguising these packages in and taking them into these prisons. He actually even said it's a theoretical possibility that the tech becomes so sophisticated that sometime soon we might see drones carrying people out of prisons as a form of escape. So serious concern, and actually the prison service feels somewhat powerless to do anything about it. They actually can't do anything about in terms of interfering with piloted aircrafts, and the effect that this is having inside the prison on all sorts of different things, from violence to sort of fueling a lack of purposeful activity, is really what's concerning the Chief Inspector. We can hear a little clip of what he had to say.
Well, when you have drugs in prison, what you get inevitably is debt, and when prisons get into debt, then some of those debts are sadly settled by violence. So what we see in those prisons that are getting high levels of drug ingress is we're seeing lots of violence as well. But also, we're seeing prisoners who are not motivated to get into the sorts of purposeful activity that the public would want them to be doing in order when they come out, they're able to get a job, get their heads down, get on with their lives.
So violence, overcrowding, all of it a pretty bleak picture. It's not the first sort of damning assessment of what's going on inside prisons. It definitely won't be the last, but a clear major theme on drones, the amount that they're heading into regular deliveries. The government say they're investing £40 million into stepping up cooperation between the intelligence agencies and the prison service, but at the moment they feel pretty powerless to stop them.
Molly, great stuff as always. Thanks so much. Molly Malone there for us. We're going to take a quick break here on The Breakfast Show. When we come back, we'll be talking to two former sub-postmistresses as they await the first phase of the Post Office inquiry's report at midday today.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up, we'll hear just how devastating the post office scandal's been for victims and their families. But first, a reminder of all of the day's top stories with Leah.
Thank you, Wilfred. And those first results of that long-awaited post office inquiry looking into the impact on victims and compensation will be published later today. Many of the sub-postmasters wrongfully convicted of stealing are still waiting on payouts. The King and Queen will host French President Emmanuel Macron and his wife at Windsor Castle as part of a three-day state visit. Mr Macron will also address Parliament this afternoon before attending a signature state banquet. Israel's Prime Minister has nominated Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. Benjamin Netanyahu made the announcement during a dinner at the White House as he continues his visit to the United States. Criminal gangs are using drones to drop packages with up to 10 kilograms of drugs into jails. In his annual report, the Chief Inspector of Prisons has warned access to drugs is destabilising jails and rehabilitation efforts. And more than 100 people have now been killed in flash flooding in Texas as search and rescue efforts continue, with at least 40 people still missing, and the region is also bracing for more heavy rainfall.
Time to talk about the post office scandal, because at midday today, the first phase report of the inquiry will be released, and one core area of focus is the redress scheme. Delighted to say we're joined now by two former sub-post mistresses, Seema Misra and Janet Skinner. Good morning to you both. Thanks for joining us. Do you look forward to this moment, or is it a kind of reminder of how long you've been waiting and the
I don't think it's a case of looking forward to it. It's part of the process. You don't look forward to having to listen to what we've already suffered anyway, and which is what we're going to be doing today.
And Seema, as we sit here right now, what level of redress have you received?
Nothing. Like I received some interim payment. That's it. Still waiting for the final. So, but the fight is still on.
Yeah. And I mean, for our viewers, we should mention you both face jail time.
Yes.
Seema, talk me through what that was like.
It was horrible. I never thought I was going to come out alive. And if I would have been pregnant, I would have definitely killed myself. It's just a shame thing. Till now, date, I'm okay to fight with post office day in, day out, but still the imprisonment bit still can't come in town with it, because I was sent to prison, we were sent to prison for the crime we never committed. So that's difficult to accept.
Janet, your reflections on being sent to prison wrongfully?
I have two teenage kids at home. I went to court expecting to come out. I was advised to take a guilty plea. To be honest, I actually didn't find out until 2020 that what I'd actually pleaded guilty to wasn't what I thought I was pleading guilty to. And it's just, it destroys you as a person.
Do you feel like the whole tone and approach of government in particular, but the nation as a whole, has changed towards the plight you face, or is it still vastly insufficient?
I think people are starting to think that a lot of us have already been compensated, and that's not the case. We're being fought strongly. First it was by the Post Office, wasn't it, and their legal representatives. Now, obviously, we're part of the OC group, which has been given over to DBT to controlling for the financial redress side of it. we've just got to hopefully give them the benefit of the doubt and see what happens.
In terms of, Seema, what you have an issue with now, is it the scale of the payments, it's the pace of the payments, it's all of the above?
Everything, to be honest, like definitely the compensation is the main, one of the thing, but main thing we're fighting was accountability.
Yeah.
So we were sent to prison for the crime we never committed, but crime did happen. So why are there so many people roaming around freely? So the main thing is accountability. So the actual culprit should be behind the bar. So the system could be correct, right?
Yeah, people what we need to realise is the fact that this isn't just about computer system.
That's it.
The computer system didn't send us to prison.
No, it was the people. It was the people did.
And you'd like to see them go to prison?
Definitely.
Yeah, they should be put into a court of law and dealt with in exactly the same process that we was dealt with.
Just finally, are you supportive of Sir Win Williams and the Post Office inquiry, or is there even an element there which has taken too long?
I think it needs to be given more power, because if he was a sitting judge and all of this information was put before him, he would what he said on that day would be made law. You would have to follow that.
Correct.
Where with an inquiry, it just comes on findings and recommendations. I mean, we already know the government don't like recommendations anyway.
Definitely. There won't be any directions, it's still a recommendation, but you need time to implement now.
Well, we really appreciate you coming in ahead of the report at 12. We all await it eagerly, no one more so than the two of you, and perhaps we can hear from you again when we get the report.
Yeah, that's fine.
Great to have you in with us.
Thank you.
Seema and Janet, thanks so much for joining us. Let's pivot now to Wimbledon. Big day ahead. The last Brit standing takes to centre court. Jackie Beltran's there for us. Jackie, what can we expect?
Well, on paper, Cameron Norrie, 61 in the world, against the Wimbledon champion, two-time Wimbledon champion Carlos Alcaraz, number 2 in the world, the man who never knows when he's beaten, who snatched victory from the jaws of defeat at the French Open a couple of weeks ago. On paper, it looks like a real mismatch, but Cam Norrie is absolutely rejuvenated this Wimbledon. He's a former semi-finalist here. Somehow, he is a very different player. He's sort of fist-pumping. He's much louder, sort of a bit more American. He did go to American University, of course. He just is rejuvenated here. So there have been extremely odd results over the last week and a half. So do not counter out that he could win this. He's beaten Alcaraz before, albeit 2 years ago, but he has beaten him before. He knows what it feels like. He knows his game, and he looks like he's quite wily. So let's see what he can do today against the man who is going for 3 Wimbledons in a row, who has won 18 matches unbeaten here. He has been playing golf with Andy Murray, and he has lost that, so you just never know. Last night, the world number 1, Yannick Sinner, was up against Grigor Dimitrov, and that was extremely dramatic, and the underdog Dimitrov was absolutely winning that match by 2 sets to love. It was 2 games all in the third when Dimitrov fell to the grass clutching his chest, which was really worrying to see at the time. He then said, it's my pec, my pectoral muscle. He's torn it or done something to it. He then couldn't raise his racket or lift his arm. He went off for a bit of treatment, but it was very token. He was straight back on again to shake hands with the referee and say, I can't continue. He was in tears. He left the court in tears, couldn't carry any of his bags. Sinner had to carry all his stuff off the court. And it was just a very sad end to a match that he was absolutely in control of. And Sinner was a little bit injured himself as well. So that could have been one of the biggest upsets of the tournament, and it's not to be. Sinner goes through saying straight away afterwards, I don't count that as a win. But he goes through to the quarterfinals.
Well, Jackie, tough day for him, of course, but we look forward to Cam Norrie later today. Jackie Beltran live for us there in Wimbledon. Time now to talk to Lord Brown, chairman of Beyond Net Zero and the former group chief executive of BP, and also a candidate to be chancellor at Cambridge University. Lord Brown, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. Let's start, if we can, with the sort of state of play across the UK and I guess the need that we're expecting as we approach the autumn statement for more taxation. Is that the right approach when we see the jitters in the bond markets rather than more borrowing over the medium to long term?
I'd expect we've got to quite a peak point in taxation, just both comparatively with the rest of the world and actually historically inside the UK. A lot of increases in taxation may not be as effective as they seem on paper because those who are taxed have choices to go elsewhere.
And do you think there are a lot of wealthy people leaving the country?
I think there are, in my experience. Quite how many, I've no idea. I expect someone does, but I've no idea. I think on spending, you know, one of the things I've observed always is that governments spend on projects and they say they're going to come in on a certain number, and they never do. So all spending is very risky because government projects always overspend, and they're always late. So there's lots more money needed than not. So I think one of the ways of thinking about how to stop spending is to focus on the things that really, really matter. We can't do everything and we can't please everybody.
Would a wealth tax be a mistake for this country?
I believe it would be a mistake because I think, first of all, it would send the wrong signal, very negative for entrepreneurs and people who want to create new businesses, and actually may be very ineffective because those who can, and there'll be quite a lot of them, will probably arrange their affairs to be elsewhere.
You're running to be Chancellor of Cambridge University. Does education rank as still one of the great strengths of this country, or is it slipping? No, it does. It's one of the great strengths, one of our both explicit strengths. You know, we've got some very powerful universities, top four of the most important universities in the world, Cambridge, Oxford and UCL and Imperial. And we do great things in research and great things in education. But I think my book, we've got to do, certainly for Cambridge, make sure they're around every single table that makes a difference in decisions, make sure they really commit to meritocracy, commit to being in service to the country, so be relevant, and make sure that they maintain values like freedom of speech. All these things could be under threat, maybe longer term, but they're really important to remember that great credibility is built on having great universities. In the US, President Trump's obviously criticising various top-level educational institutions day in, day out. Could we benefit from that? Could we be doing more to benefit from that?
We could. My own view is that very, very settled people, very distinguished people, are unlikely to move. But I think postdocs and younger, earlier stage career people possibly will move, and indeed we'll find out in many of the present rounds being conducted to recruit people. I chair the Crick Institute in London, and we're going to have some rounds for group leaders, and I'd expect that we'll have a lot of applications from the United States.
Lord Browne, it's a pleasure to catch up with you as always. Thanks so much for stopping by. I wish we had more time, but I'm afraid we have to get to a little bit of breaking news.
Pleasure.
Lord Browne joining us, Chairman of Beyond Net Zero. We've got a bit of breaking news that has just crossed. Lord Tebbit has died aged 94. That's according to the PA news agency. His son told PA that he died peacefully at home.
Yeah, Lord Tebbit was an influential figure in the Thatcher government, from a working class background in Essex to a career as an airline pilot. Norman Tebbit, he reached the heights of the Conservative Party, of course, in the 1980s, and he served as an employment secretary, also party chairman too. And during his time in government, he was one of the high-profile victims of the IRA's bombing at the Grand Hotel. This was in Brighton, and his wife was paralysed during that time too, for the rest of her life. But he was known for his prominence and his staunch reaction to riots during Margaret Thatcher's early years. And he was quoted at one conference as telling those in attendance that his father didn't riot. When he didn't have a job, he got on his bike and looked for work. And he stepped down from politics around 3 years ago.
He, of course, as you pointed out there, Leah, and Mari's here to discuss his legacy as well, is perhaps best remembered for the way he supported his wife as well, as Mari said. He was affected by the bomb at the Grand Hotel in Brighton in 1984. His wife Margaret was left permanently disabled, and that is why he stepped down early, I guess you'd say, or not early, but in the middle of the Thatcher years at the 1987 election to care for his wife off the back of a bombing that I guess him and his wife were only affected by because of his role in politics.
Yeah, I mean, he was known to be one of those politicians who really took on the trade unions and wanted to an extent, to kind of dismantle some of their power, let's say. And we've actually just got a statement from his son that's been coming through from the Press Association that said at 11:15 p.m. on the 7th of July 2025, Lord Tebbit died peacefully at home, aged 94. His family asked that their privacy is respected at this time, and a further statement regarding funeral arrangements will be made in due course. I think, depending on, your political beliefs, to an extent, putting those aside, he was a titan of his age. He was an incredibly influential, high-profile politician during Margaret Thatcher's time as Prime Minister. He changed, to an extent, the course of history. He was also, as Leah was outlining, party chairman in the Conservative Party at one point, and therefore clearly shaped the direction and the legacy of the Conservative Party as it is today as well. And I think that interesting analogy around on your bike. So he was known for this phrase, on your bike, despite the fact that he never used that phrase, but it was in reference to exactly what, Leah, you were talking about, which is that he said that when his father was unemployed and looking for work, he didn't riot, he got on his bike and went and tried to find work. And he was often criticised perhaps for being unsympathetic at times to some of those rioters and workers and perhaps their predicament and their experiences, but he was known as a free marketeer, and he believed in those political beliefs and that ideology, through and through to his DNA to an extent.
Let's just remind you of the news that has broken in the last few minutes that Lord Tebbit has died. The former Conservative Party grandee. He was chairman of the Conservative Party in the 1985 to 87. He was, before that, the Minister of State for Trade and Industry, and before that, the Secretary of State for Employment in the early 80s. Of course, departments that were hugely consequential in the Thatcher government at a time when she took over, of course, following the economic declines of the 70s and put through all sorts of industrial policies that divided opinion greatly. As we also mentioned, he is well known for the fact that he was affected by the bomb in Brighton, the Grand Hotel, in 1984 that was targeting Margaret Thatcher, but Tebbit was injured and his wife was left permanently disabled from that explosion. And he stepped down from cabinet at the 1987 election because of that. Remained a big figure in the Conservative Party, though, ever since, a grandee, of course, and was ennobled as Lord Tebbit in the years that followed.
Yeah, he had a seat in the House of Lords after stepping down as an MP. That was in 1992. But I suppose his childhood and those early experiences really shaped who he was. He was born in 1931 in Ponders End in Middlesex, and this was at the height of the Great Depression. He went to the local grammar school. Later in life, he had his first job, actually, at the Financial Times, and that's when he first clashed, I suppose, with the unions to try and break that power of a closed shop. He later, after national service, he became an RAF pilot, so a really rich and illustrious career, and then later turning to politics, and he was the first Conservative MP for Epping. This was in the 1970s, and then 4 years later for Chinkford in Essex. So a huge career, and as Mari outlined, had huge impact at quite a pivotal point in British politics, Mari.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some amazing anecdotes here from his time in office. And I think something that really stands out to me in terms of his background and his working class background. So it's really interesting. He says he was cut from a very different cloth. And Harold Macmillan remarked at one point saying, "I heard a cap on the radio this morning talking with a Cockney accent. They tell me he is one of Her Majesty's ministers." And that was Norman Tebbit. And it just shows you how, to an extent, he was breaking down barriers, perhaps in terms of his own background, coming into the Conservative Party and being so high profile and powerful, and actually kind of dispelling perhaps some of those myths that the Conservative Party was only for a particular type of person or somebody from a particular background. And clearly he was evidence front and centre in Margaret Thatcher's government that that was no longer the case, and that actually you could come from a humble background, you could have an accent or a regional accent and still make it to the top of government in a Conservative Party, which again was often associated with being elitist and perhaps wealthy individuals and so forth.
We're able to bring in now political commentator Adam Bolton, who joins us to weigh in. And Adam, Norman Tebbit, a giant figure of the Conservative Party, a giant figure of British politics. Sorry, we've now got the connection with Adam. Adam, great to have you with us. We're just reflecting on the giant stature of Norman Tebbit in British politics. I don't think the connection is actually working at the moment with Adam Bolton yet. We'll bring in... Oh, there he is. Adam, just great to have you with us. And we were just reflecting on the giant stature of Lord Tebbit in British politics.
Yeah, I think that's certainly right. Other than Margaret Thatcher, he probably was the leading Conservative politician of the Thatcher era as far as supporting Margaret Thatcher was concerned. Of course, Michael Heseltine became the main thorn in her side, and he was later Deputy Prime Minister. I think, you know, what Norman Tebbit represented was the fact that he was a Thatcherite. He was someone who didn't like the European Union. He was someone who didn't like big government and who famously was always associated with that catchphrase of "on your bike" for unemployed workers. What he actually said was that his father got on his bike and found work. He didn't actually tell workers directly to get on their bikes, but that was always associated with him. Then, of course, he was one of the major victims of the Brighton bomb. He was permanently injured, but his wife, Margaret, who died a year or so ago, she was crippled and in a wheelchair for the rest of her life, something Norman Tebbit, of course, felt very bitterly about, and he spent a lot of time looking after her. But even after that tragedy in 1984, he went on to be the Conservative Party chairman and the architect of Mrs. Thatcher's third election victory in 1987. Again, that was somewhat controversial. He was the party chairman, but was considered to be very abrasive. And actually, they had a thing called Wobbly Thursday, where they thought that they might be about to lose that election. And Lord Hunt was brought in, Lord Young was brought in as a co-chairman to kind of turn the campaign around. Of course, it went on, and Margaret Thatcher won the 1987 election, her third election victory fairly comprehensively. So I think the other thing about Norman Tebbit was he was a character. He wasn't afraid to say what he thought. He got also into some hot water when he talked about the so-called cricket test with reference to immigrants from around the former British Empire and colonies, saying, you know, if you want to be integrated into British society, you should be supporting England rather than India or Bangladesh or Pakistan. And again, some people saw that as being a racist statement. I mean, the thing about Norman Tebbit was he was very good company. He worked for a long time, actually, at the start of Sky and Sky News. He and the Labour politician Austin Mitchell presented a programme together called Target, where they supposedly were attacking a politician from left and right. One of the problems, though, was that the big issue of the day was Britain's membership of the European Union, and both Austin Mitchell and Norman Tebbit were against membership of the European Union. So sometimes there wasn't that much tension between them.
It sounds like a great programme. I want to go back and watch it, Adam. And obviously, you were central, as you were for many decades, to Sky News at that point, and no doubt got to spend quite a lot of time with him in those roles, but also other roles off camera. Talk to us a little bit about that, because sometimes people can form an image of someone who's quite abrasive on some policy areas, as you've already outlined, as assuming they might be abrasive off camera. Did that apply to Lord Tebbit?
Well, there was always an element of danger about him. You thought that you might say something which could offend him, and he would certainly bite back if he disagreed with you. But he was actually very genial company. I mean, I often surprise people by saying that if you had to spend an evening in the pub or having dinner with a politician, Norman Tebbit would be good company and friendly and warm company, whereas perhaps some of the people more admired centrist politicians, one thinks of Roy Jenkins, for example. Late Roy Jenkins could be quite pompous and quite hard work. Certainly Norman Tebbit wasn't pompous. And of course, he had a very interesting life history, coming from a working class background, actually early on joining a trade union, SOGAT, which was one of the newspaper unions, which turned him forever against the cold shop. And he, his big legislative reforms were trade union reforms. Then he went into the RAF and was a jet pilot. And from there, he went into BOAC, as it then was, the main British overseas airline. And so, he wasn't just someone who had gone to Oxford, been a special advisor at Westminster and climbed up the ladder to get into government like so many politicians today. He was someone who really had lived life and had a life outside of Westminster. And that, I think, gave him a quality which helped him to connect, not just personally, if you're having a drink with him, but also with many in the general public as well.
Adam, in terms of where he stood within the sort of Thatcher years more broadly, and in terms of standing by Thatcher's side, we often reflect on those that were great allies of hers until they suddenly weren't at the end of her 10-plus year reign. Where did he stand? Was he always a very close ally of hers, or did he also pivot in the later years?
No, he certainly didn't pivot away from supporting her. I think, he read the political mood, and I think he knew that it would be an uphill fight to keep her in office. But he was absolutely a Thatcher loyalist to the end. And of course, he took the decision to stand down from the House of Commons in the 1992 election, the election which John Major fought once Mrs. Thatcher had been deposed as Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party. And he wasn't one of those who was constantly sniping from the sidelines. He didn't seek to attack the Conservatives after he had left office. But at the same time, if asked, he made it pretty clear that he wasn't necessarily very impressed with the way things were going.
We just had a statement, Adam, from Kemi Badenoch, of course, the Conservative Party leader. Mari, what has she been saying about Lord Tebbit?
Yeah, so Kemi Badenoch has just done a tweet in reaction to Norman Tebbit's death. And let me read it to you now. So she's talked about how he was a titan, and she said, our Conservative family mourns... sorry, this is Loading. A Conservative mourns the loss of Lord Tebbit today, and I say my sincerest condolences to his loved ones. Norman Tebbit was an icon in British politics, and his death will cause sadness across the political spectrum. He was one of the leading exponents of the philosophy we now know as Thatcherism, and his unstinting service in the pursuit of improving our country should be held up as an inspiration for all Conservatives. As a minister in Mrs Thatcher's administration, he was one of the main agents of the transformation of our country, notably in taming the trade unions. But to many of us, it was the stoicism and courage he showed in the face of terrorism which inspired us as he rebuilt his political career after suffering terrible injuries in Brighton, and cared selflessly for his wife, Margaret, who was gravely disabled in the bombing. A reminder that he was first and foremost a family man who always held true to his principles. She then ends by saying he never buckled under pressure and he never compromised. Our nation has lost one of its very best today, and I speak for all the Conservative family and beyond in recognising Lord Tebbit's enormous intellect and profound sense of duty to his country. May he rest in peace.
And a further statement coming through, Leah, from a former Tory leader in David Davis.
Yeah, David Davis.
Oh, no, not quite Tory leader. Sorry, I'm getting confused. Tory Grandee.
Yes, David Davis. He's just saying this morning, Norman was a great working-class Tory, always ready to challenge establishment, conventional wisdom, for the bogus nonsense it often was. He was a great friend of Thatcher. He had to deal with the agony that the IRA visited on him and his wife, and he did so with characteristic, unflinching courage. He was a great man.
Adam's still with us to discuss this. Really interesting, Adam, that both David Davis and Kemi Badenoch focusing on that working-class Tory aspect.
Yeah, perhaps still exceptional when one thinks of grandees who've led the party, like the very privileged David Cameron, quite recently, for example, although, of course, there have always been other working-class Conservatives like John Major who got there. But it did give the Conservative Party a view of the world, outside of Clubland, if you like, in the West End of London. And what I think we heard there from Kemi Badenoch and also from David Davis is a sense that if you're talking about the direction of the Conservative Party, Norman Tebbit has had the last laugh, that the Conservative Party today is Tebbitite in terms of its attitudes towards Europe, towards trade unions, towards a small state and low taxation, in a way that perhaps through the years of its leadership from John Major through to David Cameron, it wasn't. So in that sense, as a Conservative politician, given the state of the party now, he might feel that he's been vindicated. Of course, that doesn't necessarily reflect itself in the low level of popularity across the whole electorate that the Conservatives are now suffering.
Again, I guess it's interesting to reflect on how politics changes, Adam, and the long-term commitment, not just to his party that he showed, but to the idea of public service and not the kind of come in, come out mindset that perhaps applies more to politics today.
Yeah, I think that's perhaps true, but it's also worth noting that basically Norman Tebbit retired from frontline politics in 1992, so we've had 30 years since where he enjoyed shooting, for example, but also felt that he had to devote more time to his wife following her crippling in the Brighton bomb. So, again, I think that shows that he wasn't someone for whom, politics was everything. He didn't die in harness as a former politician. He carried on with his own life and his own friends and retired to the country. So yes, he had a sense of public service, but I think he also felt that once he got Mrs. Thatcher re-elected and once the party rejected her, that he'd done that and he would move on to broader things. So in that sense, he's someone, he's had a long life, but he did have a hinterland of other interests. I mean, it wasn't an accident, for example, that he talked about the cricket test. He liked sport. He liked cricket. He liked following those things. So, I think people see him as a hard man. I mean, back in the old days, that puppet show Spitting Image used to show him in a leather jacket with a sort of bicycle chain as a kind of hoodlum ready to beat things up. Actually, Norm Tebbit was a much broader and more rounded person than, that slightly thuggish image might have given you the impression.
Just remind us, Leah, as well, this news crossed, 20, 30 minutes ago.
Yeah, just a statement was released earlier this morning from Lord Tebbit's son, William, saying that at 11:15 p.m. on the 7th of July 2025, Lord Tebbit died peacefully at home. He was 94 years old, and the family asking for privacy at the moment, at this time, as you'd imagine, and there'll be more details on funeral arrangements which will be made in due course.
Mari, we've heard from a number of high-profile Tories that the current leader, Kemi Badenoch, of course, saying he was an icon in British politics.
Yeah, exactly. She's talked about how the Conservative family is mourning the loss. She said he was an icon in British politics and his death will cause sadness across the political spectrum. And she talks about how he was one of the leading exponents of the philosophy we now know as Thatcherism, in terms of just how pivotal he was in the architecture of that political belief system now. And she said that he was one of the main agents of transformation of the UK, especially around taming trade unions, in her words. And also then she talks about his stoicism, his courage, and the fact that he inspired so many in the way that he reacted and rebuilt his career after, as you were talking about, those bombings in Brighton that left his wife permanently disabled. And then she talks about how he didn't buckle under pressure, he didn't compromise. And clearly she's talking about how she's taking inspiration from that in her own political career. That's what it sounds like to me. And that the nation has lost one of its very best. And then we've also had the likes of Nadeem Zahawi, former Chancellor for the Conservative Party, saying he was a giant of the Conservative politics and Conservative ideals. That's something that keeps coming up about how close he was to Conservative ideals and ideology. A man who looked after his wife, a man who nurtured and befriended young Conservatives like me, he says. Alex Burghart calls him a titan. Nigel Evans has said he was a giant of a politician who stuck to his principles. He was a huge beacon of light during Thatcher's government. And he says you served your country with distinction. So an outpouring of gratitude from Conservative big beasts. And really, I think as the morning goes on, we can expect to hear more from the likes of, especially the kind of old guard in the Conservative Party, the likes of Andrew Mitchell, Sir Roger Gale, the father of the House, those who really knew him well.
Perhaps also from Sir John Major, of course, who would have worked much more closely with him. Adam Bolton is still with us. Adam, just take us back, if you can, to the scale of a moment in British politics, in British life, that the 1984 bombing of the Brighton Hotel was, where, of course, Margaret Thatcher was one of the targets, but Lord Tebbit was perhaps the most high-profile victim, alongside, of course, his wife, who suffered more from it. And how big a moment that was in British politics?
Well, it was an absolutely massive moment. I was working in the political team for another station, TVAM, and we were covering the party conferences by shooting stuff on camera and then editing it overnight. I was editing at 3 in the morning when the message came through that there had been a bomb attack on the Grand Hotel where the Conservatives were staying. And within the hour, I was on Brighton seafront. I actually saw Norman Tebbit being carried out from the rubble and was reporting that with our then colleague John Stapleton, and it was an enormous shock. There had been an intermittent IRA mainland bombing campaign since the mid-1970s, but the Brighton bombing, the planning of it, the fact that the bomb was placed near where the Prime Minister was likely to have her suite many weeks before, time to go off on towards the end of the Conservative Party conference, was a extremely strong and impressive technical operation. Of course, I think 4 people were killed at the time in the Brighton bombing, including Conservative MPs. Mrs. Thatcher wasn't, partly because she was actually outside her bedroom in a bathroom at the time that the bomb went off. And obviously, as people were being dug out of this hotel, which really had been blown up, there was a question as to whether the party conference should go on, but Mrs. Thatcher determined that there would be a meeting on the Friday morning and expressed her defiance in the face of terrorism, something, of course, Norman Tebbit later expressed himself. Both of them were the supporters of capital punishment of the death penalty, although, of course, it had been abolished in the UK by the time that the Brighton bombing took place. But I think what we forget, Wilf, is that politics was a much freer, more open business before the Brighton bombing. I mean, I remember being there and, you could basically wander into the Grand Hotel and talk to people, whether you had a pass or a member of the public or not. Now, when we go to party conferences, or indeed when we go to Parliament, there is a ring of steel around the buildings where the politicians are, which obviously creates a division between them and the public, but is essential, not just because of IRA terrorism, which of course came to an end ultimately with the Good Friday Agreement, but also since then we've seen a number of Islamist attacks on politicians. So if you think about Norman Tebbit and Margaret Thatcher, they were politicians who felt much freer engaging with ordinary citizens, partly because they could, and sadly, security reasons, which really started with the Brighton bomb, have put increasing barriers between our senior politicians and actually meeting the public.
Really fascinating perspective, Adam. And we can bring in now as well John Craig, our chief political correspondent. John, your reflections of the impact that Norman Tebbit had on British politics.
Huge. He was one of Mrs. Thatcher's true believers. He was the MP for Chingford, a seat now held by Ian Duncan Smith, who, of course, was one of Norman Tebbit's great supporters. And he made his name, really. There was a group of right-wing Tories, you call them right-wing Tories if you like, on the backbenches in the late 70s when the Callaghan government was struggling. I'm thinking of people like George Gardner. He never became a minister, but Nigel Lawson did as well. And then, of course, when Mrs. Thatcher won in 79, Norman Tebbit became a minister, and it was a big reshuffle of 1981 when he joined the cabinet. Now, Mrs. Thatcher had her government struggled in the early days, a bit like people will say not as badly as Sir Keir is at the moment, but she struggled, and there were a group of cabinet ministers who were known as the Wets, who were not Thatcher supporters. And there's the famous speech at a party conference. She said, "You turn if you want to, the ladies not for turning." And then in 1981, she brought in a momentous reshuffle when her true believers like Norman Tebbit and Nigel Lawson joined the cabinet. And the post that Norman Tebbit was given was Employment Secretary, to tame the power of the trade unions. He'd always been very anti-trade union, going back to his days as a British Airways pilot. He was brought in to tame the unions. He brought in anti-union legislation, and of course, partly because of the Falklands War, Mrs. Thatcher turned everything round, and then he became one of the most senior members of the cabinet and one of her most loyal allies. He absolutely revelled in his reputation as a working-class bruiser. Michael Foot, who was leader of Labour up to 83 before Neil Kinnock, called him a semi-house-trained polecat, and he loved that. His other nickname was the Chingford Skinhead. That was portrayed in spitting image. He was shown with a leather jacket on and always up for a fight. He loved that image too. I remember talking to him. I was working in newspapers back then. I worked on the Sunday Times in the mid-'80s. And I remember he loved his working class image. I remember he said to me once, talking about snobs in the Tory party, he said, "Oh, they think I eat peas off my knife." And he loved his image. He, of course, as Adam's just been describing, the Brighton bomb, that was just such a huge event, as Adam's been describing. And who can forget the images of Norman Tebbit being rescued? He was trapped in his hotel room. He was badly injured. He had to take time off work. His wife, Margaret, was paralysed and spent the rest of her life in a wheelchair. And then as I recall, it was Norman Lamont, who was the Minister of State for Industry, who stood in for him. It was after the '83 election, he became the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry. And he succeeded Cecil Parkinson. Cecil Parkinson had to quit. Cecil Parkinson, of course, was another Thatcher favourite, but was involved in a sex scandal over a love child, and Norman Tebbit succeeded him then. But then the Brighton bomb, some people say he wasn't quite the same afterwards. I don't think he lost any of his edge, to be honest. He was still a great political campaigner and a bruiser. He came back as Tory chairman. Mrs. Thatcher brought him back as chairman for the '87 election. And I vaguely remember, I think it was Michael Dobbs, now in the Lords, the author of House of Cards, who became his chief of staff. And the '87 election was quite a tough one for the Tories because there was tension between Lord Young, another Thatcher favourite, and Norman Tebbit. And there's claims that Lord Young at one point grabbed Norman Tebbit by the lapels and we're going to lose this election. Anyway, they won it. And there's a famous picture of Mrs. Thatcher and Norman Tebbit leaning out of a window in the then Tory HQ in Smith Square when they won that election. She didn't win with as big a majority as she had in '83, but it was still a big majority. Then, of course, later on, I remember doing one of the most notorious or famous Norman Tebbit stories, the cricket test. Now, the cricket test was when Norman Tebbit said that, sort of inquired, well, how British ethnic minority people are depends on which team they support at cricket. Now, that was actually my story. Norman Tebbit had given an interview to the Los Angeles Times, of all things, and it was spotted. But I was then working on a paper called Today, the late and many would say unlamented Today newspaper. And our stringer in Los Angeles tipped off our news desk, and I did the story. We splashed it with a picture of a cartoon of Norman Tebbit and wickets tumbling, the cricket test. So he was controversial right throughout his career. Eventually, he left the Commons in '92. Ian Duncan Smith succeeded him in Chingford. He had a great relationship with a journalist called Chris Moncrief, who lived in Chingford. And Norman Tebbit would drive him home to Chingford every night. So, of course, they had a good chat about politics. And he remained really in the public eye. He retired, eventually left the House of Lords. But he will be remembered with great affection by politicians who were around in the '80s and '90s. And I see one of the current Tories has described him as a titan, and that's absolutely right. He was a massive figure, and of course, with all the Brighton bomb, of course, was possibly the defining moment of his career.
And Mari, not just Tories that are praising him at this moment.
Yeah, exactly. Nigel Farage, the leader of the Reform Party, has tweeted saying, Norman gave me a lot of help in my early days as an MEP and was a great man. Rest in peace.
Yeah, interesting from Nigel Farage there. We're able to bring in now Lord Dobbs. John just mentioned Lord Dobbs, of course, as a former Chief of Staff of Norman Tebbit. Lord Dobbs, we're very sorry for what must be some tough news for you, but what a legacy he leaves.
Oh, and now I have to say it's a morning when all sorts of thoughts and memories are being stirred up. He was, as John was saying, he was a very tough politician. He knew what he wanted, was willing to take the risks to push through the policies that he thought was appropriate. But behind the scenes, he had a great sense of humour, great understanding. And, of course, I will always remember him on a personal level for the enormous sacrifices that he was forced to make, but made very willingly, to care for his sick wife, who was so terribly and tragically injured at the Brighton bomb. I mean, we will all remember Norman being dragged out of the images of Norman being dragged out of the rubble of the Brighton bomb. But for hours beforehand, he had lain underneath all of that rubble, holding hands with his wife, saying goodbye because they thought that they weren't going to get out of it. I mean, it was a remarkable personal story. He retired or took a back seat from politics in order to care for her, which he did for the rest of her life. A truly remarkable man on many levels.
Just to expand on that for us a little bit, Lord Dobbs, because he really always was by her side.
Very much so. I mean, she was confined to a wheelchair. He was a man, as we've heard, he was a working class man. He had no money, no great money behind him. He had to find ways of caring for her for 24 hours a day. That's how badly injured she was. But he did it. He devoted. I mean, he was a man who many thought would become Prime Minister. But he swallowed the disappointment of not being able to continue with his great love of politics in order to pursue his greater love and his greater duty of caring for his wife, who essentially was injured because of her loyalty to him. So I have to say that my experience of being a very close friend of his and Margaret, his wife, helped inspire me to write The House of Cards, because it showed me what incredible personal pain often lay behind the superficial veneer of politics.
What about his impact in the 80s, but particularly the early 80s? And clearly, maybe lightning rod is too strong a phrase, but clearly he was the centrepiece for a lot of clashes that the Thatcher government had with workers across Britain.
Lightning rod was his phrase. He said, I have to protect the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, from this. I'm going to take all of the terrible criticism that would inevitably come on my shoulders. But I have to disagree with my old friend John Craig when I think he said in his earlier thing that Norman was anti-trade union. Not at all. He simply thought that trade unions had a very important role to play, and he himself had been a trade unionist, but they should play it within the law and within the system. And, you know, it's ancient history, but we shouldn't forget it, that Britain in the 60s and 70s was the sick, regarded as being the sick man of Europe. The trade unions had destroyed government after government after government. But when they said, oh, Margaret Thatcher and her bunch are going to come in and change all this, people thought that this was madness. But very carefully, very patiently, step by step, they brought trade unions back within the law. And I think many people regard the next 10, 20 years as being a period of extraordinary success on that front.
Well, Lord Dobbs, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Great perspectives there, unique perspectives on Lord Tebbit. And they're just, for those people just joining us, remind us of the news that we learned 40 minutes ago.
Yes, Norman Tebbit, who served as a government minister for Margaret Thatcher's government, has died at the age of 94. We got a statement earlier this morning from his son William saying at 11:15 on the 7th of July, Monday evening, Lord Tebbit died peacefully at home, aged 94. It goes on to say his family asked for their privacy and that it's respected at this time, and a further statement regarding funeral arrangements will be made in due course.
And Mari, lots of commentary from across the political spectrum, but particularly from Tory party grandees and the current leader.
Yes, exactly that. So Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, has put out a tribute to Norman Tebbit. She talks about how he was an icon in British politics and his death will cause sadness across the political spectrum. She talks about how he was one of the leading exponents of the philosophy we now know as Thatcherism and had unstinting service in the pursuit of improving the country, and that he should act as an inspiration for all Conservatives as far as she's concerned. She said in Mrs Thatcher's administration, he was one of the main agents of transformation of the country. And then she also talks about his stoicism and his courage as well, and saying, especially in the face of terrorism in those bombings in Brighton that left his wife gravely disabled. Kemi then talks about how he never buckled under pressure and he never compromised, and our nation has lost one of its very best today. And then we've had tributes pouring out from all corners of the Conservative Party, the old guard, as well as some of the younger ones. Nadeem Zahawi talks about how he was so welcoming to young Conservatives like him at the time. Nigel Farage from the Reform Party, the leader of the Reform Party, has said he gave him a lot of help in his early days and he was a great man. Priti Patel, the shadow foreign secretary, has said he was a giant of the British politics and the Conservative Party, devoted to promoting freedom and liberty, and gave a lifetime of service to the country. And it was a privilege to know him and receive his support and advice. And I think that's something that seems to be a running theme in some of these reactions, is that a lot of these Conservatives are very grateful to Norman Tebbit for the support that he gave them.
Norman Tebbit, of course, was one of Margaret Thatcher's closest allies during her premiership in the 1980s. Another of them we're able to bring in now was Lord Powell, who joins us this morning. Lord Powell, your reflections on this sad news of the passing of Norman Tebbit.
Well, one doesn't have to be a member of the Conservative Party to recognise that Norman Tebbit was a very substantial figure indeed a crucial figure in bringing about the great transformation of Britain, which happened under Margaret Thatcher. I doubt she could have done it without his support. And from the point of view of someone who was a civil servant working for the Prime Minister in Number 10, Norman's great advantage was you did not have to worry about him. He was going to be loyal to her. He was going to be supportive of her. He would always be backing her up and behind her. And that was a huge advantage because, as I said, I don't think she could have brought about the great changes without the support of people like him. And there weren't all that many.
His dedication to Margaret Thatcher perhaps surpassed only by his dedication to his wife.
Well, that was certainly true throughout most of his political career. They had their differences towards the end of his time when he was party chairman and so on before the 87 election. But basically, yes, they stood shoulder to shoulder on what they both regarded as the most important issues in British politics. Support for the free market. That was very definitely one of them. A belief that the trade unions did not have a right to run the country, but it was for the democratically elected government to do that. And a belief that people should show initiative, should get out to find jobs for themselves. He's often quoted for talking about getting on your bike. It wasn't others he was telling to get on their bike. He was saying what he did. He showed the initiative to do it. And that helped. It helped that he was a real person in the sense that he'd had a real job. He'd been an airline pilot. He hadn't just made a career in politics. He was a man with experience of the world, experience of the difficulties of the world. And that, again, gave her an invaluable line into the bedrock of our country.
Where were you, Lord Powell, when the news reached you of the Brighton bombing, which, of course, was one of the defining moments of Lord Tebbit's life?
I was actually sitting in number 10 that evening. I had not gone down to the party conference. I was sitting there, heard about it, and was obviously extremely sad indeed to hear that he was amongst those who were badly hurt, and Margaret Tebbit perhaps even more. Of course, the first concern was for the safety of the Prime Minister. Had she been hurt, had she been damaged, by some miracle she hadn't been, and she was taken away to safety. But she was very upset indeed by what had happened to Norman and to Margaret Tebbit. And I don't think she ever quite recovered from the shock of that.
What was the impact on Lord Tebbit?
Well, it certainly didn't make him love the IRA. I think he did perhaps introduce a note of bitterness into his politics, which hadn't been there before, and that's quite understandable. When people try to assassinate you and do you terrible damage, you don't feel very cheerful about it. But he remained loyal to her on everything, supportive of the government's policies, and continued to play a substantial role in the government. Obviously, it couldn't be quite as big a role, as forceful a role as he had before, but he was still very much at the very heart of all the big decisions, and he shared with her the same views on virtually all of them, including Europe.
Lord Powell, just finally, in terms of what he was like as a person behind the scenes, we've discussed this with some of our other guests this morning. He was a lightning rod, as Lord Dobbs said it, in terms of the clashes between the Thatcher government and various trade unions in particular. What was he like off camera, behind the scenes? Was he similarly abrasive in that regard or not?
No, Norman was not automatically abrasive. Absolutely not. I mean, I used to see quite a bit of him after he had retired at a conference organised every year in the United States by President Ford. And Norman insisted on taking Margaret there, despite the logistical difficulties. And at those evenings there, up in Colorado, up in the Rocky Mountains, Norman was the soul of the party. He was lively, he was funny, he was cheerful, he was a great conversationalist, a man you could have fun with. And one respected him all the more for that, because he was really two people. He was the rock-solid Thatcherite in politics, and he was a charming human being who had come up the hard way in life and taken his knocks, but knew how to enjoy life at the end of it.
Lord Powell, great to chat as always. Sorry for the reason for it. Charles Powell there joining us, a former Margaret Thatcher, a very close ally, as was, of course, Lord Tebbit. And Leah, just remind those people that are just joining us, it's just past 9:30 of the news of the hour.
Yes, we heard a statement earlier this morning that Lord Tebbit had passed away yesterday evening, 11:15. His son, William, asking for privacy at this time, which is completely understandable. We're hearing that he died peacefully at home. We're also hearing that funeral arrangements will be made in due course. And
unsurprisingly, Mari, lots of comments, particularly from the Conservative side of the political aisle, but not solely.
No, not solely. So we've had a lot of the political big beasts in the Conservative Party showing their support and condolences, of course, but also the leader of the Reform Party, Nigel Farage, has weighed in on his tributes as well. And I think the golden thread that I am noticing with all of these tributes from politicians that knew and respected Norman Tebbit is that they are all very grateful for his support to kind of younger, fresher, newer MPs, despite the fact that he was such a political big beast. The kind of words they used, giant, titan, one of the greats. And I think that is something that clearly must have stuck in people's minds, is perhaps the level of humility, and people perhaps surprised that somebody so important and with such a legacy would still be so warm and welcoming to the likes of the kind of new intake of the Conservative Party.
We're going to move on from this story now, but we will have more on it later on in the programme. But just to repeat the news that Lord Tebbit, the former Conservative Party grandee and close ally of Margaret Thatcher, cabinet member during most of the 1980s, has died this morning. It has been reported by his family. As I said, we're going to move on now to some of the day's other news. And the first results of the long-awaited Post Office inquiry will be published today. Volume 1 focuses on the impact the scandal had on victims and the compensation process. That financial redress is likely the most important issue for the hundreds of sub-postmasters wrongly convicted of stealing because of the faulty Horizon software. Many are still waiting on payouts. Adele Robinson met the family of one of them.
I feel like I just was so... I feel so... It stole such a lot of me. Yeah.
This is the Post Office Horizon scandal, still being felt.
I find it really hard to say, but I was so vulnerable. But I didn't fully understand. No.
Sisters Kate and Rebecca are indirect victims.
I have had, very dark thoughts of suicide.
Their mum, Elaine, was convicted of stealing from her post office branch in 2003.
These are my favourites.
A post office that used to be here inside their family shop.
There you go. Oh, Julia. Thank you. Look at that for service.
Brilliant.
I'm so proud of my mum. Yeah, we are so proud of her. She's just to not run away and to be so strong and to remain here. The fact that she carried on, she stood here. She faced all the people that, let's face it, would have been talking behind her back. Yeah. And that we had thief, your mum's a thief, shouted through the door.
The effect on the sisters and so many other children of post office victims is profound.
I'd gone from sort of limiting what I ate to then physically making myself sick. My only control of that situation was what food I put in my body.
Rebecca was 17 when her mum was accused, Kate just 14.
I've been in and out of therapy for what feels like most of my adult life. And it absolutely categorically goes back to this.
The human impact on all victims is a key focus for the first public inquiry report into the scandal. Kate, who set up the charity Lost Chances for the children of those affected, hopes it's recognised.
It's important that our voices are heard, not only within the report, but in law, actually. And then maybe that would be a deterrent for any future cover-ups. That it's not just the one person, it's the whole family.
Thousands of victims like Elaine now await the inquiry's conclusions.
I've always had this massive sense of injustice to want to fight for all the other children.
And a public reckoning on one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in British history.
Guilty. You can't unhear those words. And the look on my mum's face, my dad, will stay with me forever.
Adele Robinson, Sky News.
Well, the King will welcome French President Emmanuel Macron and his wife Brigitte for a 3-day state visit today. Emmanuel Macron will address Parliament this afternoon, followed by a state banquet in Windsor. But behind the pomp and ceremony lies an important opportunity for Sir Keir Starmer to question his French counterpart on small boat crossings. Rhiannon Mills looks at what we can expect over the next 3 days.
In Windsor, there is nothing low-key about the welcome that President Macron and his wife are set to receive, in what will also be an important reunion between old friends.
Parce qu'il renferme ce chapitre si poignant.
The King and Macron have certainly always seemed close, and it's a bond that's again being used to bring our countries even closer together.
This is the first time in over 10 years that Windsor has hosted a state visit, making it extra special for the Macrons. Their big day starting with a carriage procession along the High Street with their royal hosts as they make their way to Windsor Castle. But it's back here in London and those political meetings that go on behind the scenes, the ones that we don't get to see, that really underpin the significance of a visit like this.
Something that the King will allude to in his speech at the state banquet, saying our two countries face a multitude of complex threats emanating from multiple directions. As friends and as allies, we face them together. These challenges know no borders, no fortress can protect us against them this time.
Hobnobbing with the King, even for him, is still a bit special.
Lord Ricketts, who was the UK's ambassador to France until 2016, says it's not the King's role to get bogged down in issues like the migrant crisis.
His job is to set the scene, to remind everyone that Britain and France are old nations, they have an enormous amount to share, the history is there, and depth of personal relationships, and then that's the backdrop for Keir Starmer to get into the questions where maybe there are still differences.
Away from the castle, there will be more difficult discussions on current topics, as the royals again provide reminders of a shared history, and that can be very powerful, especially when delivered with the personal touch. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News, at Windsor Castle.
Well, Mari's here because, Mari, the sort of small boats issue will be a big focus for the Prime Minister, and there's talk of this one-in, one-out policy?
Yeah, so we don't know yet whether it's going to get confirmed, but there could potentially be something coming this week. We'll have to see. But the speculation about this one-in, one-out policy, where essentially for every Channel migrant that we send back to France and they would accept, which would be a big achievement, they would give us a legitimate asylum seeker with a legitimate claim or family here in the UK already in exchange for that. And the criticism would be that that one-in, one-out system makes no difference to the numbers. But the government would argue, first of all, it allows us to have legitimate asylum seekers that we would, accept happily anyway, but also, therefore, a positive knock-on effect perhaps in the backlogs. But also what they say is perhaps there could be a knock-on effect in terms of it may act as a deterrent for those thinking about crossing the Channel in small boats if they think to themselves they'll just be sent back anyway. And so we'll have to see whether it does come off. There's been trepidation around the fact that that there'd be a concern if it was announced too early and wasn't quite ready to be implemented, then would that act as a kind of put rocket boosters, as it were, up people's boats, as it were, and essentially trigger a surge in people who are trying to get in before the policy comes into play. So there's still lots of complications around that, and it doesn't appear to be finalised. But if something like that were to be revealed this week, I think it would be seen as Labour indicating that they are taking this seriously, that they are managing to get things out of the French that the Tories never managed to get out of the French, and therefore, actually, that reset with Macron, with the EU, is really starting to bear fruit.
Of course, Macron's addressing Parliament at about 4 p.m. today, which we look forward to bringing you live here on Sky News. Now, earlier as well, with the Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander, we were talking about taxation, and in particular, the topic of a wealth tax and whether or not that would be a less unpopular tax to increase than others.
We've always been clear as a government that those with the broadest shoulders should carry the greatest burden. And if you look at some of the decisions that we have taken in the last year, be it the changes to capital gains tax, the changes to the non-dom rules, because we believe that even if you're born elsewhere but you live in the UK, you should be paying your fair share of tax. We obviously applied higher taxes to private jets, and we said to the 5% of parents who send their children to private school that actually they can't get the tax breaks on private school fees, the VAT tax breaks that they previously did, so that we could invest that money in public services.
And Maury, I guess the headline here on this is for a second day now, after this whole idea was introduced, by the way, on Trevor's programme on Sunday by Lord Kinnock. For a second day in a row, the government don't want to shut this down.
No, they don't want to shut it down. And the fact that they are allowing it really to gather a bit of momentum feels like they are considering it and perhaps finding a way to do something like this that is popular among a lot of people, especially Labour activists and voters, and to try and show that actually they are still laser focused on helping working people. She said that those 3 tax pledges from the manifesto still stand, so those haven't been junked or kind of turned away from. But clearly this idea of a wealth tax they are seeing is gathering momentum, has popularity with a cohort of their voters at least, and they're thinking to themselves that perhaps they need to find a way to show that they are going to be perhaps a bit more restorative, as it were, when it comes to wealth distribution in this country. The difficulty is both the Lib Dems and the Tories don't tend to unite on much, but actually both Lib Dems and Tories don't agree with this wealth tax. They both agree that it will not actually raise the money that you think it will. Many countries have tried and it hasn't worked. Those with huge amounts of money are often quite mobile, and therefore can leave and go to another country with a better tax rate if they so decide to. And so the question will be, how does Labour, if it does decide to do a wealth tax, how does it actually make a wealth tax actually work, and what would the knock-on effects be?
Mark, great stuff as always. Thanks very much for that. Time to get up to speed now on all the day's other stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. Criminal gangs are using drones to drop packages with up to 10 kilograms of drugs into prisons. They're finding part of the annual prisons from the Chief Inspector of Prison, Charlie Taylor. We had him on the show earlier. He said it's destabilising the system currently, and the rehabilitation of inmates is a bit of a problem. Elsewhere, the government plans to ban non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, designed to silence employees who've suffered harassment or discrimination. Labour wants to amend a section of the Employment Rights Bill, which could void those legal contracts. Israel's Prime Minister has nominated US President Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. Benjamin Netanyahu handed over the nomination letter for the US President to read during a dinner. This was at the White House last night. It comes after Mr. Trump took credit for stopping the conflict between Iran and Israel last month.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. We're going to take a quick break here on The Breakfast Show. When we come back, we'll be back out with Jackie at Wimbledon ahead of Cameron Norrie's all-important match because he's the last remaining Brit. We'll be right back.
gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report. Sky Business sponsors this report.
Let's get out to Wimbledon now. A massive day. The last Brit standing will be on centre court. Jackie Beltrow is there for us now. Jackie, talk us through the action that we can expect today.
Well, it's quarterfinals day today, and Cameron Norrie is the last Briton standing. He is up against Carlos Alcaraz, the two-time defending champion, the world #2. Cam Norrie is 61 in the world. Alcaraz has just won the French Open again for the second time, and he is in an unbeaten run on these surfaces. 18 matches unbeaten. So on paper, it really does look like a bit of a mismatch today, as he's the only unseeded player left. But he has been playing really excellent tennis. He looks like a man rejuvenated, ready to fly back up the rankings. He used to be in the world's top 10. He's really slid because last year was a very bad year for him. But he's found this confidence from somewhere. He's playing great tennis, and when he's on a roll, he's quite difficult to stop. He got to the semi-finals here in 2022. And Alcaraz has not been at his absolute best yet at Wimbledon, so he has got a chance. Alcaraz has dropped a set in all but one of his matches. So I think if he gets off to a good start, and he really does need a good start, and continue that great run that he's been on, he's got a chance. He's beaten him before twice, so he knows what it feels like, and it wasn't that long ago. Well, actually quite long ago, 2 years ago. But he knows what it feels like to beat Alcaraz, and he knows what he plays like. So let's see what happens. He's got absolutely nothing to lose, and it's a great feat that he's managed to get this far, considering how he was playing before. Last night, Jannik Sinner, the world #1, was in action on centre court, and very dramatic scenes there last night because Grigor Dimitrov, who he was playing, was very much in control of that match. 2 sets to love up, 2 games all in the third set. Looked like there would be a great upset on the cards when Dimitrov fell to the grass, clutching his chest. He was in extreme pain, and it was quite distressing to watch, never mind be in that situation. Turns out it was his pectoral muscle. I think people were worried it might have been his heart, but it was his pectoral muscle. He couldn't then raise his arm. He went off for a bit of treatment, but it was very token. He had to come straight back on and concede the match. And Sinner had to gather up all his stuff and take all his bags off for him. And he said afterwards in the winner's interview, I don't class that as a win. You know, it's a horrible situation that nobody would have wanted. So he goes through, but very distressing, very sad scenes on centre court last night with Grigor Dimitrov, and we wish him all the best.
We certainly do, Jackie, and for a different reason, we wish Cam Norrie all the best as well today on centre court. Jackie Beltrow there for us at Wimbledon.
Now, a siren will go off on mobile phones across the UK in September to test the National Emergency Alert System. Emma Birchley is here to tell us more. What can we expect then?
So, Sunday, September the 7th, around 3 p.m, you will hear this. That's if it all goes to plan. So, in theory, what should happen is that tone will sound for 10 seconds. 87 million devices apparently should get this. And there'll also be vibration and a message saying this is just a test. Last time there was a test, it was April 2023. Actually, they didn't all go off. There were problems with the network, which is why they do these tests. But the idea is really for it to be a warning system, an alert system, in case something is going wrong, in case there's an emergency. So it could be things like floods, fires. Back in December, Storm Dara, a warning went out to 3.5 million people across Wales and parts of southwest England, warning them what was coming up, and actually 2 people ended up dying in that. But another one, Plymouth, early last year, unexploded World War II bomb found in Plymouth. There was a cordon. People were warned within that cordon to get out. That was about 10,000 people. So you can see how it's already been used. What's really important, though, telling us today is not just about warning us this test is coming. It's also really important for people maybe who suffer from domestic violence. They're victims in the home. They have a second phone hidden for emergencies. They are being told to make sure they go online, government website, opt out. Really important.
Really fascinating, Emma, and interesting to hear how many phones there are in the UK. So quite a lot of people have 2, by my count.
You
87.
included.
Me included. I like to keep church and state separate. Sky
I love that, yeah.
and life separate.
Is this not life?
It is for 3 hours every day, but it's not all that is there in life. Anyway, Emma, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. We're going to have a quick look at the weather.
The perfect climate, wherever the destination. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Returning high pressure will make it mostly warm and dry later this week, with heatwave conditions likely in places by the weekend. It's mostly fine now, though cool in the north. But Norfolk has a few showers, while Ireland and the west of Northern Ireland are rather dull and damp. Mainland Britain will stay mainly dry and sunny all morning, but East Anglia can expect further showers. Ireland, Northern Ireland and the Hebrides, meanwhile, will see low cloud extending to most parts, bringing a little patchy drizzly rain. It'll be warmer generally.
The perfect climate, whatever the forecast. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.